Those gusty winds, and again from mid-morning onwards it's another day of heavy showers, and again feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be a winner just like Phil?
Obviously, whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
Enter our massive spring giveaway. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of March.
NHS dismay. Just 1 in 4 of us are satisfied with the performance of the NHS. New figures reveal this is the lowest level of satisfaction on record. Are you still proud of our NHS?
And spills of raw sewage into England's rivers and seas. They're at the worst on record. New figures show that there were more than 3 million hours of spills last year. But who's to blame? Is it all actually sewage? And what can be done?
And Brits fighting for Putin in Ukraine. We asked the question, should these traitors receive the Shamima Begum treatment and be stripped of their British citizenship?
Should these traitors be begummed? I begum, you begum, they begummed.
It's actually Shamima Begumed, but anyway, that's the term we need to use on this one. Should they be Shamima Begumed? Should they have their citizenship stripped from them? Or do you actually think, you know, they're not going to work for a terrorist organisation? Some might consider it to just be as bad, but others, we've already had emails in, since we spoke about this on Britain's Newsroom, we've already had emails in saying it's nothing like the Shamima Begum case.
Have we seen how the Wagner Group operates in Ukraine and around the world? You could I mean, they're perhaps a mercenary group, sure, but they do employ the tactics of terror.
Yeah.
I mean, the bombing of civilians, the contravention of all norms of war. I think you could very easily make the case that there has been a campaign of terror from the Russian military.
Well, you know what I think?
auxiliaries.
I don't think they should step foot back in this country. Why should they? If they love Putin's Russia so much, I'm sure Putin will gladly give them a visa
And let's
if
not
they
forget,
don't have one already.
This isn't just Russia. This is an axis of evil. This is Iran. Russia are using Iranian drones, suicide bombing drones from Iran. And, of course, they are funding themselves through Chinese money as well. This is an axis of evil. Russia, China, Iran, even North Korea a little bit on the side. These are the countries that are all working together in this space. I suppose the question is, can these two Brits really lose their citizenship without being made stateless? I think the only way that you could actually do this is if they were given citizenship in Russia, and they might not like Russia. I mean, Russia doesn't have any McDonald's anymore.
Yeah,
Russia doesn't have any integration into the global economy.
Are they traitors? Should they be jailed? Should they have their citizenship stripped? Should they be Shamima Begum? Let us know. GBViews at gbnews.com. But first, it's your headlines.
Emily, thank you. The top stories this hour. Public satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with waiting times among the biggest concerns. A poll found that difficulty accessing GPs is also a major worry, with the number of people satisfied with the health service now just 24%. That's down from 70% in 2010. Rates of dissatisfaction are roughly the same across both major political parties. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. We asked people in Manchester for their thoughts on Britain's health service.
Once you get there, yes, but it's actually getting through the GP to getting to the NHS. I think that a lot of money is wasted talking to people that work or have worked within the NHS. The amount of waste is phenomenal. So I think they need to look at the management. It needs to start at the top.
Thankfully, I don't use it a lot, but I'm currently on the waiting list for one of the hospitals in Manchester for 12, and it's a 52-week wait.
We should make it like a more accessible thing.
I am satisfied because there's a lot of hard-working nurses, doctors, surgeons. Like, you see the care they give you. And plus, I had 3 of my children here, and the care I received was perfect.
There was a 54% increase in sewage in England's waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. It comes amid rising concern for the state of England's waterways, with a part of the River Thames that's to be used for the boat race this weekend found to be contaminated with E. coli. The Environment Agency's Director of Water, Helen Wakeham, says it's disappointing but not surprising.
The Environment Agency required water companies to monitor all their discharges. We've got 100% coverage now of the sewerage network, and that accounts for some of the increase. But actually, it just shows the scale of storm overflow operation in a wet year. And the purpose of putting the monitoring in place was to make an argument for more regulation and more investment in storm overflows. And I think, you know, the results from last year show exactly why that's required.
The search for survivors following yesterday's bridge collapse in Baltimore has been suspended, with 6 people presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge at around 1:30 yesterday morning local time. The collision plunged cars, their drivers and construction workers into the water below. If you're watching on TV, this is the scene in Baltimore this morning. You can see the wreckage of the bridge and that cargo ship still in the water. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. A review has found that a 10-month-old baby who was murdered by his parents just weeks after being handed back to them should have been in protective care. Finley Bowden's parents, Shannon Marsden and Stephen Bowden, inflicted Over 100 injuries on their son before he died at his family home in Chesterfield, Derbyshire, on Christmas Day in 2020. They were given life sentences in May. A safeguarding review found practices in the local authority were inadequate. It said that while Finley's parents were responsible for his death, professional interventions should have protected him. Safety experts are calling for more action to prevent deaths caused by exposure to asbestos more than 25 years after it was banned in the UK. It's estimated around 300,000 non-domestic buildings constructed before 1999 still contain the deadly material. About 5,000 people die from exposure to asbestos every year. Experts say more needs to be done to improve public awareness and improve removal processes. And finally, Wales has missed out on qualifying for the Euro 2024 football tournament. It's after losing to Poland in a penalty shootout in Cardiff last night. They won 5-4, putting them through to their fifth successive European tournament. The defeat for Wales comes after they secured a 4-1 victory over Finland in the playoff semi-final last Thursday. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 7 minutes past 12, and a damning new survey has revealed that public satisfaction with the NHS has plummeted to an all-time low. Just 24% of respondents say they were pleased with the performance of Britain's beleaguered health service.
Yes, high waiting times and staff shortages were cited as patients' primary concerns. And the new data marks a sharp decline in public confidence in the NHS since 2010, when satisfaction, in 2020, when satisfaction was over 50% still.
Yes, just before the pandemic, I think it was 60% satisfaction, now down to just a quarter of us.
And Labour tell us that in 2010, it had its highest ever public satisfaction rates.
Interesting. Let's get this more information now with Health and Social Affairs Editor of the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnston. Now, Lucy, there'll be many people pointing to the fact that satisfaction really collapsed after March 2020. I suppose a lot of this has got to be to do with COVID.
Absolutely. We practically shut our doors to many people with many other problems, and the NHS became focused on very much one single disease, and that built up problems in the system, which was already struggling, and we now have an absolute legacy of that with excess mortality and people with huge problems waiting for care, and over 7 million on the waiting list. But the problems we've had problems every single winter. I've been doing this job for a long time, and we're always writing about backlogs of ambulances and clogged up systems. And interestingly, the survey picked out people believe that increasing staff numbers and increasing money will fix this. But we've been doing that for a long time, and the NHS has become famous for throwing pots of money and doing short-term quick fix solutions. And it doesn't seem to be working. The Dutch spend about the same amount of money as we do on their health system, and they don't have these kind of waits. So I think that politicians need to be brave enough to look at sort of real reforms and to get to the roots of some of these problems which have become entrenched.
Lucy, the report's author, Dan Wellings, who's a senior fellow at the King's Fund, he said that a lot of patients feel like their relationship with the NHS is a toxic one. Do you think he means by that essentially people are reliant on the NHS, but they're not getting what they deserve in return, a bit like a relationship gone wrong?
Absolutely, and we can see that people are waiting years for care. They're waiting in pain. They're struggling. There are some parts of the country where the waiting lists have just been closed because they can no longer put more people on them. So it doesn't work for the vast majority of people. And I think we do need to think about radical things like opening up the system for 7 days. Premier Inn does it, Google does it. The armed forces wouldn't work on a sort of 4-day operation. And I was reading something this morning which showed that there was an activity. We lose about 30 to 50% of our activity in hospitals because we're not running the system full time and we're not running over 7 days. I know doctors don't necessarily want to see that, but we need to modernise, and we need to. It has the same system as it had in 1948, and we have a very different population with very different treatments.
And yet, Lucy, 9 years ago, David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, the now Foreign Secretary, promised a 7-day NHS. It was one of the policy planks of the 2015 Conservative manifesto, a manifesto that won a majority in the House of Commons. Did that just never materialise? And frankly, are there things that we can learn from other countries that perhaps are finding this period less challenging than the NHS is?
Absolutely, and we have countries like Israel and Australia. They have systems where you have health bodies that look after their own regions. So we've got a sort of central government, we've got lots of quangos, lots of money wasted. The doctors fought off that attempt to bring in 7-day working, and perhaps they would do again, but someone has to be brave enough to actually look at that and bring it in. And the other thing that is really important, I think, the Department of Health and Social Care, as it's called, is a bit of a misnomer. The social care part is never given the same attention or funding that the hospitals are, and social care is something which councils have to look after. They are cash strapped. People are, struggling in their homes. They clog up the GP surgeries, they clog up the hospitals, and if people aren't prepared to look after their elderly loved ones, as many people aren't for whatever reasons, we really have to think about how to fund that properly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time. Lucy Johnston, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. I mean, looking at this survey, apparently satisfaction with social care is even lower, 13%, the lowest since the survey began. And also what's interesting is 48% of us, so nearly half of us, still think that increasing taxes and increasing the spending on the NHS is the way to improve it. So it might improve it a little, but could you really see more money, more taxes?
I reckon, ask those people, how many people realise that in real terms, adjusted for inflation, spending on the NHS has risen by 1/3 since 2010?
Yes, I imagine that probably wasn't in the survey question.
No, tens of billions of pounds more, adjusted for inflation, and yet you don't feel that it's got any better. But how do you feel about the NHS? Because our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, has been speaking to people in Manchester and joins us now. Sophie, what have you found?
Well, like the weather here in Manchester today, the response has been really rather grim. As you say, public satisfaction at the lowest level it has been since records first began in 1983. But that's not to say, however, that people are not in support of the idea of the NHS. 91% of people still believe that the NHS should be a free service available when needed. 82% of people saying that it still should be paid for by the taxpayer. However, given the response to this in terms of public satisfaction, it's clear that people are not happy with what their money is buying for them. Top 3 gripes that people had: 71% of people are not happy with waiting times, whether that's with their GP or at a hospital itself. Second up, 54% of people are unhappy about staff shortages, and third, 47% said the government were not putting enough money into the NHS. Now, I've been here in Manchester this morning trying to gauge the public's reaction to this. Here's what they had to tell me.
Once you get there, yes, but it's actually getting through the GP to getting to the NHS. I think that a lot of money is wasted talking to people that work or have worked within the NHS. The amount of waste is phenomenal. So I think they need to look at the management. It needs to start at the top.
Thankfully, I don't use it a lot, but I'm currently on the waiting list for one of the hospitals in Manchester for a 12, and it's a 52-week wait.
We should make it like a more accessible thing.
I am satisfied because there's a lot of hard-working nurses, doctors, surgeons. Like, you see the care they give you. And plus, I had 3 of my children here, and the care I received was perfect.
Well, there we have it. A bit of a mixed bag in terms of responses from the people of Manchester this morning. I think that one lady at the end there must be part of the 24% of people who did say they were satisfied with the service being provided by the NHS. But there is still the overwhelming majority of people who say they're not happy with what their taxes are paying for, and that something needs to be done to improve overall satisfaction with the service being provided.
Thanks so much, Sophie Reaper there in Manchester. Appreciate your time on this. I mean, that does chime with what the survey says. People, the top 5 reason for NHS satisfaction, just takes too long to get a GP or hospital appointment. 71% of people say that. That's the issue, isn't it? A lot of people say, you know, once they're in the door, they get decent treatment, and the nurses and the doctors are working hard and all this. No one wants to say a bad word about the staff
this is the difference between the
themselves.
system and the staff, isn't it? And it's perfectly legit. And I think sometimes the worry is with the system that it is, as it is currently constructed, is if you say this could work better, this could be faster, we could apply this principle in a more efficient way, then people are like, why are you attacking the nurses? Why are you attacking the doctors? And that's not the case. We can separate the system from those who work within it.
Yes, very good point. But in other news, sewage spills have hit a record high, with waste leaking into rivers and seas more than doubling in the last year.
Yes, figures released by the Environment Agency show there were 3.6 million hours of spills, compared to, get this, 1.75 million hours in 2022.
Absolutely massive increase there. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas, with spills at their highest since 2016.
Well, Helen Wakeman, Director of Water Transformation, the Environment Agency, spoke earlier today.
The system is designed to overflow when it fills up, and storm overflows overflow because that's better than sewage and rainwater backing up into people's homes. But obviously the system is operating far more often than we would expect it to do. So the answer will be better maintenance from the water industry, but actually more investment in the network. And what's planned over the next 5 years, what the water companies want to do is to invest another £10 billion in improving storm overflows, and that should start to see this problem starting to go away. But actually it might take another 25 years to properly fix the system.
Well, there we go. That's the explanation. But let's speak to Louise Reddy now, the Policy Officer for Service Against Sewage. And Louise, do you take the point that was just explained there, that if there isn't this overflow mechanism when there's a lot of rain or just a lot of excess sewage, the alternative of this stuff going into rivers and the sea is it bubbling up into our houses?
So this is something we hear a lot from water companies and the regulator, as we just heard from there. And it is an overflow mechanism. So it is something when there's too much rainfall, water companies are legally allowed to discharge sewage into waterways. But that's actually only when there's exceptional circumstances of heavy rainfall. Now, last year, we heard, as you said earlier, 3.5 million hours of sewage being discharged into waterways. That equals 1,271 times a day. That's over 1,000 times a day sewage is being discharged into waterways. That doesn't sound like exceptional to me, and shows that we really need to actually enforce the law as it stands for water companies and regulators to be held to account properly.
So the water companies are essentially asking for more money. They think all of us, bill payers, should pay more so that they can put more money into the infrastructure to fix these sewage spills. I guess at the same time, water company bosses are receiving quite a lot in the way of cash incentives themselves, not least big bonuses. Do you think it's fair to ask for more money from us, the bill payers, to solve this?
Well, frankly, over the past 30 years, water companies have been taking customers' money and paying it out in dividends and bonuses for their executives. Unfortunately, that's been the case for 30 years. And now we need we're calling for change. We know that water companies need to improve the system as it stands, and part of that will be investment in the system. But where that money comes from is a decision that the public need to make sure that we take a stand and hold water companies to account, so they can't just run away with the money that they're calling for from people without actually putting the investment in place that they promised to improve the system.
Now, we began this segment by saying this is the highest recorded amount of sewage discharged and storm overflow discharged on record. And while that's true, 2023 was also the first year in the history of the country that every single storm overflow drain was monitored. So we now, for the first time in the history of the country, have 100% coverage of monitoring these things. It's quite possible that in the past we've had just as much, perhaps more, sewage going into our waterways, but just didn't notice.
That could be the case over the past few years, but for example, last year, we've only had a 7% increase in the monitoring compared to the discharges we saw last year. But there's actually been a 54% increase in discharges. So that's a huge disparity despite that small increase in monitoring. It's brilliant we're getting the monitoring, but actually we know that this year has been an exceptional year for discharges.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Louise Reddy, good luck with your campaign, Policy Officer for Surfers Against Sewage. Yes, sewage is the last thing you want if you want to go surfing.
It's very true.
Definitely. I mean, there's lots in this, isn't there? I mean, the water companies have spoken about Victorian infrastructure, but then I was reading that actually only about 12% of the network was actually built in Victorian times. So is that an adequate excuse? Is this also poor population management?
Hang on. Queen Victoria died in 1901. If we have
12%.
still 12% is a huge proportion. That is, what, 123 years old at the youngest?
No, I take that, but as in you can't blame... They're trying to say, oh, you know, we're just working with what we've got. We need more money from the bill payers to invest in our infrastructure. On a huge amount. But is it poor management from their perspective? I think that's got to be the case, surely.
Well, I mean, frankly, we've had huge population growth.
Yes.
We haven't.
There is more sewage.
More.
We are producing more sewage.
And also, in this country, unlike in other countries, in some other countries, when it's overflow, it's not just sewage, it's also rainwater.
Yeah.
And we had a very rainy year last year, so having rainwater mixed with sewage means that this all gets... it means it's more than perhaps you'd think at a more diluted quality.
Well, in a statement, Water UK said these results are unacceptable and demonstrate exactly why we urgently need regulatory approval to upgrade our system so it can better cope with the weather.
Well, there we go. That's nice from Water UK. Coming up, the Home Office warns that churches risk undermining the integrity of the asylum system. Documents reveal that the Clapham chemical attacker was allowed to remain in Britain despite lying and failing a Christianity test.
What was the judge thinking?
This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Shocking new study says that vaping might be linked to cancer. Not that shocking.
It found e-cigarettes can cause similar DNA changes to cells as smoking, leading experts to claim that vaping does not seem as harmless as originally billed.
So joining us now is Robert Sidebottom from the UK Vaping Industry Association. Good morning, Robert. Is this terrible news for your industry? I imagine you're going to try and defend the product still and say that there's still a lot more research to be done.
Well, I don't need to really defend the product because I think actually if you read the article and you read the detail in the article, I mean, it actually starts and it states with, while this doesn't mean that vaping has the same degree of cancer risks as smoking does, it implies that vaping may have negative health impacts. However, we've never said that vaping is completely risk-free, and we've always said that it is 95% safer than smoking, which it is. We accept that further research needs to be done, and actually we welcome studies into the health impact of vaping, as we want to give every former smoker the full confidence that vaping is considerably safer than smoking, and that's the important message.
But that's about the former smokers. What about the young people who are taking up vaping, Robert? It's better not to vape. It's better not to vape at all, and we know why they take up smoking, because you lure them into your shops with silly flavours called bubblegum.
Well, we can get into the flavour debate. That's no problem at all, because, you know, adults like flavours. Particularly I love squashy sweets. These products, and let's be absolutely clear, are not for children. They are an age-gated product that are for adults only. And that is exactly who they should be sold to.
I'm so sorry, Rob, we've run out of time, but hopefully this research will show that they certainly are not for children.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
It's 12:27. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, Labour is demanding answers on how the Home Office let a known liar and sex offender stay in this country.
Well, new court documents reveal the chemical attacker Abdul Azidi was granted asylum based on being a Christian convert, even though the judge knew there were concerns about whether he was always telling the truth.
Yes, well, to tell us more is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, a lot of pressure now on the judge's decision here to allow him his appeal and to grant asylum.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's rather strange listening to the introduction there, Labour demanding that the Home Office has questions to answer here. I think the finger actually points at the way in which the immigration appeal was handled and the evidence directly from a member of the clergy here. The Home Office have been really concerned for some time that as they try to grapple with the migration crisis, that there is an industry that's sprung up of individuals and organisations, from charities and human rights groups to immigration lawyers and indeed to members of the clergy, who are willing to go into bat for asylum seekers to fight against these carefully considered judgments that are handed down by Home Office officials on asylum to try to get them overturned. And this case of Abdul Azidi appears to be a perfect example of that. He was twice turned down for asylum, having appealed by 2018, but yet it was appealed again to the immigration court and heard by an immigration judge up in Newcastle. And the thing that swung it for this immigration judge, and we only know about this, by the way, because the media fought to have these records released, but the thing that swung it for the immigration judge was the intervention directly from this now retired Baptist church minister, Roy Merrin. Reverend Roy Merrin not only testified in person, but wrote and submitted pictures to tell the judge how he was convinced that Abdul Azidi was genuine. He had converted to Christianity. He was a good Christian and he was involved in everyday life in the church. There are pictures not just of his baptism, but also images of him handing out leaflets, Christian leaflets, in Newcastle city centre. And the judge then decided, taking the testimony of this Reverend Merrin into account, that he would grant asylum, notwithstanding the fact that he had found Abdul Azidi to be someone very untrustworthy, a liar, a proven liar. For instance, he'd claimed initially in his asylum application forms that his brother had been killed, shot dead in Afghanistan, only to change that later to killed in a bomb attack. He'd claimed originally that he was a Shia Muslim, only to change that to a Sunni Muslim. He claimed that his parents would be in very serious danger, at risk, back in Afghanistan because he converted to Christianity, but no indication how they would ever have known what he was doing in the UK with regard to his conversion to Christianity. So I think at the end of the day, what this demonstrates, and the Home Office would say this, is how individuals clearly with some authority and standing in a community can come forward, perhaps with the best of intentions, but testify on behalf of people who are then challenging decisions that have been carefully thought out by officials at the Home Office. And that does have significant sway on immigration judges.
It's extraordinary. A liar, a convicted sex offender. All he had to do was hand out some leaflets and he's let in the country. But Mark, while you're still here, today we've got some new figures confirming your scoop yesterday on the number who've crossed the channel.
Yeah, 338 in 7 small boats came across yesterday. When we were reporting on it, we'd said just over 300, so we're pretty close to the mark. And yeah, that means effectively now we're over 4,600 for the year so far who have crossed the English Channel. And that is more than 1,000 up on the same period last year. In fact, it's even higher than the record year, the year before, when some 46,000 people crossed the English Channel by the end of that year. And I think what it does is it really shows the government up for its claims that the 36% reduction last year in small boat migrant arrivals was down to the government's policy on the small boats. If it was down to the government's policy, then how can they explain what is now a 25% increase? And we've been saying, those that sort of monitor events in the English Channel on a regular basis, that it's down to the weather, that every time we see a break in the weather, those criminal gangs take advantage and they push out the boats in numbers. That's what they've been doing.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there. Tom, I just can't get over why this judge ruled in this man's favour. I mean, he had letters from the Red Cross in support of him. He had refugee charities, of course, the church backing him as well. A convicted sex offender, a proven liar multiple times, a sham conversion to Christianity. The mind boggles how many more people are going to get through the system in this same way. It's crazy.
Yeah,
It makes me angry.
Well, again, it's not necessarily questions for the Home Office. It's questions for all of these groups along the way, and the judge at the end of it. Of course, independent
He won't
from
comment on
government.
it.
But no, we're not allowed to cross-size judges. We're not allowed to do that. That's
and he doesn't have to comment on the case either. We don't comment on cases we're involved with. That's what the judge says.
Well, coming up, calls grow for 2 British men fighting for Putin against Ukraine to be arrested. But what should we do with them? We'll be having that discussion after your headlines.
Tom, thank you. The top stories this afternoon. Public satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with waiting times among the biggest concerns. A poll found that difficulty accessing GPs is also a major worry, with the number of people satisfied with the health service now just 24%. That's down from 70% in 2010. Rates of dissatisfaction are roughly the same across both major political parties. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. There was a 54% increase in sewage in England's waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. It comes amid rising concern for the state of England's waterways, with a part of the River Thames that's to be used for the boat race this weekend found to be contaminated with E. coli. The search for survivors following yesterday's bridge collapse in Baltimore has been suspended, with 6 people presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge yesterday morning. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. And a mural by Banksy in North London has been fenced off by a local council. The artwork in Finsbury Park features splashes of green paint on a residential building behind a cut-back tree, giving the appearance of lush green leaves. Credit was claimed by the street artist on his social media, but just days after it was vandalised with white paint. Islington Council says it's discussing future solutions with the homeowner that will enable everyone to enjoy the artwork while also protecting it. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
It's the final week to see how you could win big. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash that you could spend however you like. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about Sebastian? It really amazes me how a mother who can lose a child in such a shocking and unexpected way, so little, so precious, can then turn that grief into something so positive. How did you find the strength to get up, get a camera crew, as you say, travel to the other side of the world and investigate all of this?
I was angry at Sebastian for dying. You feel like saying, God, 32 years later, and I can still get very, very upset about it. I was angry that something that while he was born and lived with me and slept and then died, they were actively campaigning in New Zealand to try and stop this happening because they had a very high cot death rate there. They had the lady, the Anne Diamond, if you like, of New Zealand, a television presenter called Judy Bailey, went on telly every night and said, if you're just about to put your baby down to sleep, put him on his or her back, not the tummy, and this will help. And their cot death rate plummeted. And I went out to New Zealand and met her, and it was anger that drove me to come back and demand that we have the same advert here, the same campaign. And of course, I got all this complete nonsense from the Department of Health saying, oh, young mothers do not watch television, I was told. In other words, while New Zealand mums were being told how to save their babies' lives, we actively denied British mums that advice during the time that Sebastian and others were dying.
And the other point, I suppose, to make is it's helpful to educate all generations, because when I had my babies, my mum would say, he's not settling, just stick him on his tummy, he'll be much happier, that's what we did with you. And we had to say, well, things have changed, and, but it's about educating everybody, because it's not just the mums that get their hands on the babies.
Good afternoon, Britain. Just coming up to 20-1, and a pair of British men have been branded as traitors and an absolute disgrace for proudly fighting for Vladimir Putin's Russian army in Ukraine?
Yes, the men are named. They're Ben Stimpson and Aidan Minnis, and they've posted pictures of themselves online in Russian military gear, brandishing grenades and guns. Now, their decision to fight for Russia in President Putin's brutal war of conquest has led to calls for them to be jailed if they ever step foot in Britain again. We're wondering what people think, whether they should be Shamima Begum'd, whether their British citizenship
State of him. The
should be taken.
weedy little state of this miniature man. What a pathetic, scrawny, rat-like individual. This is the first time I've seen a picture of it. I'm just sort of taking... This is a guy who thinks he's Mr. Big Shot with a gun on his back. And look at him, he's pathetic.
I'm not sure if this is Ben Stimpson or his best mate, Aidan Minnis.
The pathetic little names as well. Minnis.
Well, that's rude. We might have a Minnis at home watching us.
I don't think we'll have an Aidan Minnis, and if we do, I'm very sorry that you have to share your name with this little rodent.
One of their fathers has already disowned his son.
Good job.
But we're joined now by defence analyst and former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What do you think should happen to these two men?
Well, it's a difficult one, actually, Emily, because the circumstances are not entirely straightforward. First of all, I would agree with you that they're not Britain's finest export, and their value to the Russian forces is probably more propaganda than it is physical fighting power, as Tom has said. However, the legislation which would seem to cover their engagement and employment with the Russian army is the 1870 Foreign Enlistment Act. The last prosecution of 1870, and the last prosecution under that was brought in 1896. And it was recently described as an antiquated piece of legislation which needs to be modified or scrapped. The problem is that we don't know, or I don't know because I'm not a lawyer, what they would be charged with. But if they were charged under that act, then that would also apply, presumably, to those British volunteers who are fighting for the Ukrainian side.
From what I'm reading here is that one of the men, Ben Stimpson, he's previously been convicted for terrorism for helping pro-Russian separatists. And his best friend is also a convicted felon, former National Front member who was jailed for a racist attack. So one of them has already been done for terrorism.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The problem is I don't know if the Russian army is an internationally prescribed terrorist organization, and I suspect it isn't. So terrorist legislation may not apply. I mean, they're both fairly despicable characters by all accounts, and they can't be, as I understand it, be stripped of their UK citizenship, because to do so would make them stateless. Unlike Shamima Begum, who had dual citizenship with Bangladesh. And so in international law, that would be illegal. So I don't know what they can be charged with if and when they return.
I suppose we can all understand that making someone stateless is fairly unviable. They can't go anywhere. They'll have no... But I mean, we could perhaps, through diplomatic back channels, say, you know what, these guys, they love your feudal regime so much in Russia. Why don't they take on Russian citizenship? We could sort of perhaps negotiate this, do a citizen swap.
Well, there's a thought. I mean, I suspect, looking at the two of them, that the Russians would decline that very kind offer, although they're obviously happy enough for them to be in the trenches in Ukraine. But, I mean, you know, one of them's 48 years old, and having been in the army, having been in many, many trenches, I can tell you that being 48 and in the trenches in Ukraine in winter is not a fun thing to do. So I suspect they're both just looking for a little bit of adventure because there's nothing at home for them. So they are sad individuals.
Yeah, I mean, Stuart, someone's written in and said, why wouldn't they be allowed back if they've been fighting for Putin? We aren't at war directly with Putin. They may well be unsavoury characters, but they're not doing anything directly against our country, and Russia is not a terror group, so therefore it's nothing like the Shamima Begum case. What do you say to that analysis?
Well, I mean, that's basically just what I've been saying, that I don't understand because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an international lawyer, under what legislation they could be charged or
But there's a
arraigned
moral difference, isn't there, Stuart, between fighting for Ukraine, a country that this country's government is explicitly backing with training and with arms and with money, versus fighting for an organisation that is taking arms from Iran, that seems to be issuing nuclear threats towards the West, that seems to have conspiracy theories that the United Kingdom is somehow behind all sorts of ills across the world. I mean, Russia is an enemy.
Well, Russia is the enemy, and certainly has been since the latest invasion of Ukraine. I think there's general recognition of that. But we're not at war with Russia, nor is NATO. And so we're in a sort of no man's land here. And these two unsavoury characters maybe have fallen between the floorboards of the current legislation, which would suggest to me that the UK government might be well advised to have a look at what the current legislation is and revise it or amend it as appropriate.
Very interesting indeed, a complex issue. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Pleasure.
Very interesting indeed.
1896, that legislation he was talking about. I mean, some people might say that, you know, we weren't that bad in 1896. Britain ruled the waves. Maybe that sort of legislation should be, relied upon.
We're helping to arm the Ukrainian army and providing huge amounts of military assistance. Ergo, Putin's Russia is certainly the enemy if we're backing
but we're not,
their
but we don't
foe.
want
So
to...
therefore, does it mean that these men are traitors for fighting?
I do understand Stuart's
Putin,
point,
or if just in the propaganda war?
We don't want to be at war with Russia. As soon as we enter that stage and we do anything towards the position of the United Kingdom or NATO being at war with Russia, that's a very dark place. That's a much darker place than we are.
We're training Ukrainian troops, we're sending huge amounts of military aid, we're sending huge amounts of financial aid, of course. Very interesting question. Let us know what you think. GBViews@gbnews.com.
We have some thoughts on that. Well, coming up, are you still proud of the NHS? You've been sending in your views, and we're going to get to them after this very short break.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who, at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll, do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the Red Wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 10 to 1, and a lot of you have been getting in touch on the stories that we've been discussing this programme so far.
Yes, we're hearing today that satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to a record low. So we've been asking, are you still proud of the NHS? What has your experience been of the NHS as a patient or as someone working within the NHS, or you have a loved one perhaps waiting for NHS treatment? Nicholas says the NHS is absolutely useless. My daughter was repeatedly misdiagnosed with IBS and later died of undiagnosed cancer. Oh, I'm terribly sorry to hear that, Nicola.
Well, Janice has written in saying, my husband received a phone call yesterday telling him to go to A&E immediately as his potassium levels were high. He's been sitting in A&E for 25 hours.
Oh, my goodness,
NHS is not fit for purpose, says Janice.
I wonder, the problem is that because people can't see their GP in a reasonable amount of time, a lot of people are being sent to A&E, which is just making the queues for A&E even worse. Robert, on the other hand, says the NHS has saved me from bowel and liver cancer and more recently a heart attack. While in hospital, I received top-class care and treatment. The problems I faced were in aftercare. Away from the hospital, it's impossible to get a GP appointment, so I was forced to use, use A&E.
Precisely what you're saying, yeah.
I mean, Robert, I think we've got to remember that the NHS, I'm very thankful that they dealt with you and that you've received top-class care. You've got to remember that the NHS, I mean, it is a health service. You know, it should be a given that you get treated.
Yes,
we shouldn't have to be overly thankful for just being able to see a doctor.
Isn't that interesting? What other country do people thank the healthcare company or the provider of the service? In every country, people thank the doctors and the nurses that treat them. But I think it might be just the UK where we sort of thank the bureaucracy that has provided it rather than the individual.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Yes, because, you know, politicians, they have their little NHS badges, you know, sometimes with the LGBTQ flag to add to the beauty.
I don't know. During COVID, it was the NHS that nicked the LGBTQ colours from the LGBT community.
Oh.
They stole the rainbow. It suddenly became the NHS rainbow with all these, you know, everyone put rainbows in their windows. Well,
you know what Con says? He says the NHS's problems start with the general public not looking after themselves. Well, you know, that might be true. Sometimes the NHS does. The NHS has told us not to eat a whole Easter egg because clearly we're incapable of, you know, rationing ourselves. Portion control. Are we to blame for the state of the NHS? I don't think so.
Michael says some politicians seem to have conveniently forgotten or even ignored the fact that over 1 million extra immigrants have entered the country over the past year. How can hospitals, schools, doctors, house building keep up? Although, statistically, migrants coming in will be less likely to use the NHS because they'll be younger. They'll use it in the years to come, but right now they might not be the biggest drain on resources within the NHS. In fact, more people might be adding to extra funding.
I don't know about that, because mostly if you arrive in this country, you're going to sign up with a GP pretty sharpish, and you're going to need care, and you're going to have dependents, and you're going to have babies, and need maternity care. You're going to need all sorts of different care. And, of course, you're going to get old too. And at the same point, we can't seem to build hospitals in a timely fashion.
No, you're absolutely right there in terms of when they get old, it will be a problem. But I think at the moment, the problems don't arise from the growth in population.
Well,
if anything, we need a larger population.
Of course, if you have a larger population and you don't build enough hospitals and GP services and dentists as well, dentist surgeries, that's a key problem too.
Yes.
You are going to have you know, difficulties.
But younger people tend to be net contributors, whereas older people
Well,
need more
I'm not
care.
sure if that's across the board.
But coming up, we're talking sewage. New figures, of course, show there were more than 3 million hours of spills last year. But who's to blame? Where are these spills? And what, if anything, can be done? This is Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weather remains very lively. Heavy downpours across much of the UK today. It's still pretty gusty and blustery as well. And here's the reason why. Low pressure continues to dominate. These weather fronts spiralling bands of rain across the UK. It's been particularly wet in Northern Ireland. Weather warning in place here until 3 this afternoon. A line of rain working its way into eastern England. Ahead of that, we have seen some sunshine, some sunny spells following, but also a whole host of blustery showers blown in by a gusty wind, and the wet weather across Scotland, falling as rain at low levels, but some snow over the higher routes possible here. Cold feeling day in northern Scotland, 6 or 7 elsewhere. Well, just about double digits, but still feeling chilly for the end of March. More heavy showers will spread northwards overnight, and this zone of wet weather will be, again, mostly rain at low levels, but could provide some snow, particularly across parts of the West Midlands, up towards North Wales, down towards Gloucestershire for tomorrow morning. It's going to turn windy again through tomorrow as well, particularly from the southwest as further rain comes in here. It'll be a chilly night in Scotland, touch of frost here, but northern Scotland should see some sunny spells during Thursday. Another band of rain then swings up from the south, and very blustery conditions along the south coast. There's a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds. And again, from mid-morning onwards, it's another day of heavy showers, and again, feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weather remains very lively. Heavy downpours across much of the UK today. It's still pretty gusty and blustery as well. And here's the reason why. Low pressure continues to dominate. These weather fronts spiralling bands of rain across the UK. It's been particularly wet in Northern Ireland. Weather warning in place here until 3 this afternoon. A line of rain working its way into eastern England. Ahead of that, we have seen some sunshine, some sunny spells following, but also a whole host of blustery showers blown in by a gusty wind, and the wet weather across Scotland, falling as rain at low levels, but some snow over the higher routes possible here. Cold feeling day in northern Scotland, 6 or 7 elsewhere. Well, just about double digits, but still feeling chilly for the end of March. More heavy showers will spread northwards overnight, and this zone of wet weather will be, again, mostly rain at low levels, but could provide some snow, particularly across parts of the West Midlands, up towards North Wales, down towards Gloucestershire for tomorrow morning. It's going to turn windy again through tomorrow as well, particularly from the southwest as further rain comes in here. It'll be a chilly night in Scotland, touch of frost here, but northern Scotland should see some sunny spells during Thursday. Another band of rain then swings up from the south, and very blustery conditions along the south coast. There's a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds. And again, from mid-morning onwards, it's another day of heavy showers, and again, feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think.
I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of March.
The shocking figures which reveal that spills of raw sewage along with rainwater into England's rivers and seas are the worst on record. Last year there were more than 3 million hours of spillage. But who's to blame and what can be done?
Just 1 in 4 of us are satisfied with the performance of the NHS. New figures reveal that's the lowest level on record. Are you still proud of our NHS? We'll hear a junior doctor's take on it.
And should wealthy people pay more for the BBC licence fee? The idea has been floated by the corporation's Director General. Would that be a more progressive and fair method of funding, or will more people end up simply paying more? We'll be debating this shortly. Look, the BBC licence fee is regressive. It's a regressive tax. But I'm not sure that the answer to fix it is to simply say, OK, we'll make rich people pay more. I mean, you could just make it not a tax.
I mean, would you ask rich people to pay more for the same sandwich that someone on a lower income bought? Would you ask them to pay more for a washing machine than a poor person would pay for a washing machine? I mean, where does this end? You can't always means test everything. Oh, so should Netflix be cheaper if you're on a low income?
But, well, the interesting thing is Netflix does offer different products.
Yeah.
You can pay more for the no ads version or pay less for a version with adverts. I mean, that seems like a reasonable market offer. It doesn't seem so reasonable to means test it. And you can only means test a product like that if you're operating it like a tax. But I think the big criticism that people have is that this is a service that not everyone uses, but everyone who watches TV has to pay for.
And the problem is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are dropping out of the licence fee altogether every year. So this is just one, suggestion to try and claw back some of that money. But, I mean, what are they going to do? Charge you double if you earn more than 60 grand a year or 100 grand a year or 100... I mean, it's just, more people will say, actually, I'm not going to pay it at all. I'm not going to pay it at all. And then, what do you say about pensioners, whether they should pay a reduced rate or not at all? I think the licence fee as a concept is on its last legs. I mean, with all of these competing streaming services, people just don't see the value as they did before. Or perhaps you disagree. Perhaps you think the BBC as an institution is something that needs to be protected. And yes, the rich should pay more for the pleasure of it.
The pleasure of it. Well, on that note, we'll get to that and so many more stories after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Public satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with waiting times among the biggest concerns. A poll found that difficulty accessing GPs is also a major worry, with the number of people satisfied with the health service now just 24%. That's down from 70% in 2010. Rates of dissatisfaction are roughly the same across both major political parties. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government is committed to making improvements.
The NHS has had, to deal with the pandemic, and we all know that has created huge backlogs and huge waiting lists, and we're all committed to catch up, to provide a faster, simpler, fairer NHS. We're investing £165 billion a year. Obviously, if you're investing that much, you want to have people satisfied with the service they're getting. But we do know that we've been tackling, I mean, think for the last 4 months, the waiting lists have started to come down, but we're tackling a huge backlog. What's interesting is actually England, the Conservative-run England, the performance and the catch-up is much better than in Labour-run Wales or in SNP-run Scotland.
We asked people in Manchester for their thoughts on Britain's health service.
Once you get there, yes, but it's actually getting through the GP to getting to the NHS. I think that a lot of money is wasted talking to people that work or have worked within the NHS. The amount of waste is phenomenal. So I think they need to look at the management. It needs to start at the top.
Thankfully, I don't use it a lot, but I'm currently on the waiting list for one of the hospitals in Manchester for 12, and it's a 52-week wait.
We should make it like a more accessible thing.
I am satisfied because there's a lot of hard-working nurses, doctors, surgeons. Like, you see the care they give you. And plus, I had 3 of my children here, and the care I received was perfect.
Now, there's a 54% increase in sewage in England's waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. It comes amid rising concern for the state of England's waterways, with a part of the River Thames that's to be used for the boat race this weekend found to be contaminated with E. coli. The Environment Agency's Director of Water, Helen Wakeham, says it's disappointing but not surprising.
The Environment Agency required water companies to monitor all their discharges. We've got 100% coverage now of the sewerage network, and that accounts for some of the increase. But actually, it just shows the scale of storm overflow operation in a wet year. And the purpose of putting the monitoring in place was to make an argument for more regulation and more investment in storm overflows. And I think, you know, the results from last year show exactly why that's required.
The search for survivors following yesterday's bridge collapse in Baltimore has been suspended, with 6 people presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge at around 1:30 yesterday morning local time. The collision plunged cars, their drivers and construction workers into the water below. If you're watching us on TV, this is the scene in Baltimore this morning. You can see the wreckage of the bridge and that cargo ship still in the water. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. A review has found that a 10-month-old baby who was murdered by his parents just weeks after being handed back to them should have been in protective care. Finley Bowden's parents, Shannon Marston and Stephen Bowden, inflicted over 100 injuries on their son before he died at his family home in Chesterfield, Derbyshire, on Christmas Day 2020. They were given life sentences in May. A safeguarding review found practices in the local authority were inadequate. It said that while Finley's parents were responsible for his death, professional interventions should have protected him. A mural by Banksy in North London has been fenced off by a local council. The artwork in Frinsby Park features splashes of green paint on a residential building behind a cut-back tree, giving the appearance of lush green leaves. Credit was claimed by the street artist on his social media, but just days after, it was vandalised with white paint. Islington Council says it's discussing future solutions with the homeowner that will enable everyone to enjoy the artwork while also protecting it. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
It's 1:08 and sewage spills have hit a record high, with waste leaking into rivers and seas, more than doubling in the last year.
Figures released by the Environment Agency show that there were 3.6 million hours of spills compared to 1.75 million hours in 2022. So that's up by a considerable degree in just 1 year.
Now, the Environment Agency, they say it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas, with spills at their highest since 2016.
GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us now from Gedling in Nottingham. And Will, let's hope that there isn't much flow behind you at the moment.
Yes, well, campaigners have described it as the final damning indictment of a failing industry. This one where we are in Gedling, if I just step to the side so you can see a little bit more, the data revealed today highlighted that 315 hours worth of sewage was spilled into this particular waterway, which is in a residential area right next to a main road. That's 13 days, Tom and Emily, but that's only a fraction of the picture nationally. 3.6 million hours, which is double on the previous year of 2022. Now, both the government and the water companies have said that this is unacceptable, but the reason that they're blaming this on is particularly because of wet weather. Now, these kinds of sewage systems not only take the things that are flushed down the toilet, but they also take rain as well. And last year, they say, was the 6th wettest year on record. And to prevent flooding, they have to put water that is overflowing into sewage systems and overflow systems like this. Now, we know that this is a huge problem. Campaigners say it's the final damning indictment. Labour says that there should be a ban on bonuses for CEOs of polluting companies. Those polluting companies under the body Water UK, they say that they're investing a triple amount of money into preventing this problem, and if they continue doing it in the way that they are doing, by the year 2030 there'll be a 40% reduction in sewage waste being spilled into England's systems.
Very much indeed, Will Hollis there in Nottingham.
Yeah, goodness me, when I was a kid I used to play poo sticks with the family.
I used to play that.
I didn't think it would become literal. But let's speak to the Chief Executive of River Action, James Wallace. And James, is it true that 2023, not only the highest year on record of measuring these overflows, it was the first year that 100% of storm overflow drains have actually been measured?
Thanks for having me on. And yes, that is true. And the data, regardless, is extremely worrying. What we see here is the result of decades of deregulation and defunding of the Environment Agency, who've lost their teeth in order to hold to account these polluters. If we look where we are now, I'm actually at Fulham Reach Boat Club ahead of the boat race on the Thames at the weekend. And we've seen that Thames Water themselves have discharged absolutely huge quantities. We're looking at about 200,000 hours just for one organisation on one catchment. And this is causing a massive health crisis. We have put together some results after a month of testing for pathogens, and we've discovered E. coli, which can make you very, very ill. In fact, it can even hospitalise you. And those quantities are the volume of about 10,000 colonies of E. coli per 100 millilitres. In real terms, what that means is 10 times worse than the worst rating for bathing water status. So we've actually had to issue guidance to rowers to make sure that it's safe for them to compete in this weekend's race.
It's absolutely horrendous. The Labour Party have done some analysis, and they say that water company bosses have received over £25 million in bonuses and incentives since the last general election. Do you agree that there should be a ban on bonuses for CEOs of polluting water companies?
I do agree, and it should be a lot more than that. I think some of these people should be held criminally responsible as well. There's a lot of activity here that is below the radar and below the law, and it's been allowed to happen for a long time, as I've just said. What we really need to see here, and I'll use Thames Water again as an example because it's very pertinent ahead of the boat race, that we have debts accruing in this particular organisation's case up to about £18 billion. They're due to repay 190 million in April, and they can't. So what have they done? They've gone to the regulator, Ofwat, the Environment Agency, and they said, please don't prosecute us, please don't enforce the law. Instead, let us off the hook. And what we would like to see is not only CEO bonuses banished, but also for an organisation like that that's completely failing for its customers and the environment. We'd like to see it taken into special administration.
Are we likely to just see instead far higher bills for all of us? That's what the water companies are asking for.
Well, yeah, and again, in the case of Thames Water, they're looking at a 40% increase. But to that, I would say, come on now. You've had bill payers' money for decades to fix these leaky pipes. Climate change and extra rainfall is not new. It's been coming for a long time, and it's been warned about us for years too. So there's been plenty of time. So if we're going to increase bills, it needs to be incrementally and very slowly, and it needs to be after shareholders have coughed up, and to make sure that when they do so, they put the needs of the public, bill-paying public and tax-paying public first, alongside nature, and then investors come last, having demonstrated they can be trusted.
God, such a tricky puzzle to put together. Building so much more infrastructure to take the extra capacity. If they just turned off the storm overflow drains, we'd see sewage bubbling up into our homes, which no one would want. This is a very long-term project to fix. But James, you lay out some of those problems there really, really clearly. Thank you very much for joining us. James Wallace, Chief Executive of River Action.
Imagine if you were a rower and you fall out of the boat for a reason, and then you end up getting E. coli and being hospitalised.
Yeah, but imagine if you're sitting in your living room and you think, what's that smell? And the loo's just bubbling up because they turned off the storm overflow drain.
It does sometimes happen, doesn't it? In a statement, Water UK said these results are unacceptable and demonstrate exactly why we urgently need regulatory approval to upgrade our system so it can better cope with the weather.
Actually, that's a really important point from Water UK. There are so many plans to upgrade some of this stuff that are just stuck, that haven't got planning permission, that haven't got regulatory approval yet.
Yeah, but they're asking for...
They're also asking for money. Yeah.
They're asking for lots of money, and they're also receiving lots of money. But anyway, a damning new survey has revealed that public satisfaction with the NHS has plummeted to an all-time low. Only 24% of respondents said they were pleased with the performance of Britain's beleaguered health service.
Yes, health waiting times and staff shortages were cited as patients' primary concerns, as new data marks a sharp decline in public confidence in the NHS since 2020, when satisfaction was over 50%.
Well, we can now get the thoughts of junior doctor, Dr. Basha Mukherjee. Basha, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Are you surprised by this data? People clearly are not satisfied at all with the service that the NHS is providing.
Do you know, I'm not surprised at all, because as much as I'm a healthcare worker, I'm a patient myself. And my dad has diabetes. He's got a long-term health condition. He's moving to India now because, you know, he can't access the healthcare as he wants to. And I actually am really happy about that.
Really? He's moving to India because of the situation in the NHS here. So he thinks he'll get better care in India than he would at the NHS. Will he be paying privately in India?
He will be paying privately, but bear in mind, he's been paying taxes for years and years and years. And to get an appointment for him with his health condition, he hardly gets an opportunity, and he has to work to get it going to see the GP, line up outside, queue. And we all know that the system is struggling. And, you know, it's not just the patients who are dissatisfied. As a healthcare professional, what I came into this field for, I don't feel satisfied myself. I have to start each conversation with the patient saying, sorry, you have to wait so long. And I didn't want to be doing that either. And it feels like you have to gatekeep all these referral pathways because the funding isn't there, or you have to tell patients the disappointing truth about how long the waiting list is, or there's this shortage of this medication and that. So it is a really dire situation, and I'm disappointed. Situation.
But how much of this is COVID? Because in 2019, satisfaction was 60%. Now, of course, down to just a quarter. It seems like this has coincided with a global pandemic.
100%, and I agree that COVID has definitely been the biggest problem, and followed that with Brexit as well. But if you've just got to look at the staff shortages, 40,000 nursing vacancies, 10,000 doctor vacancies. And now the public are noticing this themselves, and they're saying staff shortages is part of the reason why they're dissatisfied. And we're focusing on staff retention. We're still not thinking about paying nurses and junior doctors and consultants fairly. Where do you think you're going to keep these staff from? We can't just keep hauling staff from all across the world to try and fill these gaps. Clearly, the public is unhappy with the way things are.
No, it's important that you reference that there are recruitment gaps, but it is also important to note that there are more doctors and more nurses in the NHS than ever before, just not quite as much as the targets would like. We have run out of time here, Dr. Basha Mukherjee, but really appreciate your time and your thoughts on this issue.
Well, how do you feel about the NHS? Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been speaking to people in Manchester. She joins us now. Sophie, the people of Manchester, are they satisfied with the health service?
It doesn't seem like they are, even if they're satisfied with the service they're getting once they get an appointment. Many of them saying that that is the real crux of this issue, that they're simply unable to get in to see either a GP or into the hospitals like the one behind me. Now, dissatisfaction with the NHS isn't exactly something new. It's been in decline for many years, but it is absolutely now, as this data shows, at its lowest ever point since records began in 1983. But that doesn't mean that people aren't happy with the idea of the NHS. People still supporting the idea of an NHS paid for by the taxpayer, paid for that it can be accessed for free whenever people need it. But it's the service that people are receiving that they are dissatisfied with. 24% of people, only 24% of people, saying that they are indeed satisfied with that service. I've been here in Manchester today asking people what they think of this, and here's what they had to tell me.
I would say the waiting list is gone up so much. People can't get into the hospital. They can't get the appointments. So the waiting list is gone up so much, and they have to wait months and months and months for the appointments, or sometimes years.
And what do you think can be done to try and tackle this as an issue?
I would say more doctors, more nurses. Yeah.
And of course that needs more money.
Absolutely. Yeah, more funding, yes. Yeah.
I haven't had many problems actually in terms of healthcare or getting appointments. I've had it fairly easy.
So what is it, do you think then, why so many people are unhappy? What is it that could be causing that?
I think it's I think one of the contributing causes might be a lack of physicians and their excessive waiting times. And I've heard a lot of stories from my colleagues and my friends that even in cases of emergency, there are people being made to wait in the waiting room for hours at a time, even with, broken legs or fractures or situations like those.
And I think those two members of the public we just heard from then really did capture the mood of the nation, the issues with staff shortages, waiting times for appointments, lack of funding, all of those things amounting to, let's be honest, dissatisfaction with our NHS.
Thank you very much indeed, Sophie Reaper, for bringing us those views from Manchester.
Yeah, outside Manchester University Hospital, which I think has to be one of the most attractive hospitals in the country.
It's good looking.
We need to build more
lovely
hospitals.
Architecture.
I think you'll probably feel like you get treated better if you don't walk into a concrete monolith. If you walk into a nice-looking, well-put-together, red brick hospital like that one.
But are they as energy efficient as some of the newer monstrosities, Tom? I imagine
they're
not.
Definitely more. They're definitely
more
better.
attractive.
They're better for patients than some of the drafty, concrete, inhuman slabs, probably made with rack concrete.
You know how they're talking about
in the 1960s?
well, it's talking about the staff shortages, and yes, we have increased massively the number of doctors and nurses over recent years in the NHS. But I wonder if a lot of them are working part-time.
Yes.
I mean, anecdotally, I know from junior doctors, friends, they go part-time quite quickly.
Well, quite often what they do is they take on a job and realise that actually they can get more time as a locum member of staff. They can get more pay as a locum member of staff than a permanent member of staff. And so you just get those huge inefficiencies of temporary workers.
Because funnily enough, people are motivated by money.
I thought doctors were all motivated by a sense of caring.
Both. Still to come, if you're rich, should you have to pay more for the BBC licence fee? I guess, what does rich mean to the BBC? The idea has been floated by the corporation's Director General. It's something we think is worth debating.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Has the NHS killed your relative and then lied to you about it? There is an alleged cover-up culture in the NHS. They lie to you about why your loved one died, about poor care, then bury documents with evidence in them, and they try to silence staff who speak out. This is according to the NHS Ombudsman. There are around 11,000 avoidable deaths every year. 11,000. Someone's mum dies, their children know something dodgy happened, and then they're met with a rotten culture, including the altering of care plans, the disappearance of crucial documents, and complete denials. They lie to you, but they really get away with it because the NHS is like a religion, and people dare not criticise it. You'd be accused of NHSophobia. The annual budget is around £180 billion, and we now have about 2 million people working for the NHS. They cannot keep blaming everything on being underfunded and understaffed. If they're covering up medical negligence, it means the problem doesn't get dealt with and it keeps happening. And that is the fault of the NHS managers, the people who run it. They've got the money for 837 non-clinical staff working at English hospitals on the highest paid Band 9 contracts, which is between £99,000 and £115,000 a year. How many nurses would that pay for? How many junior doctors? And they've got the time on their hands to think about making the NHS the world's first carbon-neutral health service. They've got time to consider whether women in labour should be picked up by an electric ambulance that might have to be recharged en route to the hospital. There are NHS managers with a budget of £180 billion, 2 million members of staff, and they're crying about being understaffed and under-resourced. If they spent more time looking after patients instead of finding ways to cover up avoidable deaths, then maybe we'd have a better health service.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, the BBC's Director General has floated the idea that wealthier Brits should pay more for the BBC licence fee.
Could this be a fairer way of charging viewers? And exactly who counts as wealthy? Who will be paying more? Well, we're going to debate this general principle now. Joining us to discuss this is the former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton, who thinks that richer paying more in practice is a great idea, and the former BBC News producer and director of Newswatch, David Keeley, who thinks that this is further nonsense from the BBC. Well, David, strong words. Let's start with you.
Yes, I think it's nonsense. First of all, as well, I think it's political opportunism. It's rather rather interesting, the timing of this. Just as Labour is expected to be elected, up comes the Director General of the BBC with a message: "Let's cane the rich in the licence fee." I think underneath that, though, there are other objections in that. How on earth will this be administered? It means that there's already a huge bureaucracy involved in collecting the licence fee. What the corporation will have to do in some way is find out who is rich and who is not. And how they're going to do that, I just don't know. So I think it's a non-flyer. And I think it's, yet again, the BBC trying to save its own hide, coming up with a political opportunist way of doing things.
I mean, Roger, we said you said the rich should pay more. In practice is a great idea. I think we meant in theory is a good idea. In practice, it might be difficult. I would argue that rich people already pay more tax. So why on earth should they pay more for the BBC licence fee as well?
Well, you could take the view that everybody should pay the same for everything, which means that the rich do rather well, don't they, and the rather poor don't do very well at all. And if you're talking about a public service, you're trying to provide something for everybody, regardless of how rich or how poor they are. So that's the fundamental problem. How do you provide it for everybody and enable everybody to have access? The rich will always have access. They can do anything. Of course, people say if you've got enough money, you can do anything you can. But what about those people who haven't? Do they be denied these services? So the question is how you pay for it. And the present system, as David would argue, is regressive in the sense that everybody pays the same, although there are some people who get it for nothing, but everybody saves the same. So in principle, the idea that the better off should pay more than the worse off for a national service is reasonable, I think, and that's our approach generally to taxation, isn't it? Income tax and so on is based upon a graduation, so those who are the poorest pay least. As a principle, I don't oppose it. I think it's difficult in practice, but I think the debate ought to be, do we need public service broadcasting? Is the BBC the best way of delivering it? And how much should we pay for it? And the Director General's speech did, thank heaven, and not before time, promise a really proper consultation period with the public about what they want, because their BBC is not the DG's BBC, it's theirs. So do we want public service broadcasting? Is the BBC still the best way of delivering it? How do we pay for it? That's the order of events we should do.
Let's throw these questions right back over, because frankly, the idea of public service broadcasting to some extent has been undermined in recent years, with the BBC chasing after audiences rather than doing things that the market might not necessarily provide itself.
Well, it's got to do two things, hasn't it? It has to do with market failure. And where there's market failure, children's programming, not having, you've got to do market failure. Then on the other hand, it has to provide something for everybody if everybody's paying for it. So it's always had to ride these two horses.
Well, hang on, David, what's your view? Do you think it is fairer the BBC is seen as a public service and therefore, you know, those with the broadest shoulders should pay more and the BBC as an institution is worth protecting? What's your view?
I think the broadcasting environment, since the BBC was founded over 100 years ago now, has changed beyond recognition. And we all know why that is happening. There's streaming services. And I think the question for the next BBC charter period, because that's what Tim Davie was discussing, and I agree with Roger here, is where does the BBC fit into that? And obviously there are different opinions on that. I don't think personally, and I know a lot of other people don't think, that the BBC can survive as the monolith it is at the moment, trying to please everyone and not succeeding. I also think that what the Director General should be looking at in this review as well is just how impartial the BBC is. It's relevant. There are an awful lot of people out there saying in surveys that they're no longer convinced that the BBC is impartial, and that's part of what just be. Yeah. Can you just let me finish? I think that is something else that should be brought into the equation here.
So David, just as a former news person, David, you recognise that when the country is very divided, be it foreign policy, say Gaza, Israel, or at home, the BBC gets it in the neck. So it would be inevitable that when the country is divided, the BBC is thought to be less impartial by those who are committed. And you yourself are a committed person on the right. You lobbied in this way. There are other people on the left who would argue the BBC is biased towards the right. When you get really divisive issues, that's when the BBC is under the cosh. It's not surprising. It doesn't mean it's less impartial. It's mean that we are more of a divided country.
David?
I don't believe that the BBC understands the impartiality issue anymore. I don't think that Tim Davie, although he came into his post saying that he was going to make impartiality his #1 priority, I don't think he's done anything to redress the concerns that there are out there at the moment. I know
that's not true.
Again, Roger, that the Britain is more divided in some ways, but the BBC, I think, has progressively become more biased in its coverage of lots of issues.
We are running to the end of this section. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your impassioned views you put across your cases, both in your usual eloquent ways. Thank you.
Roger Bolton and David Cady there. But still to come, a GB News exclusive. The mother of Brianna Jai, the transgender teenager who was stabbed to death by two 15-year-olds, she's speaking to us about her campaign for child-safe phones. That's after your news headlines.
We start this hour with breaking news. Audio has emerged detailing the moment that emergency workers tried to prevent traffic from driving onto the bridge in Baltimore shortly before it collapsed.
I need one of you guys on the south side, one of you guys on the north side, hold all traffic on the Key Bridge. There's a ship approaching that just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we got to stop all traffic.
Well, that comes after the search for survivors was suspended, with 6 people presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge yesterday morning. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. Public satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with waiting times among the biggest concerns. A poll found difficulty accessing GPs is also a major worry, with the number of people satisfied with the health service now just 24%. That's down from 70% in 2010. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. There was a 54% increase in sewage in England waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. It comes amid rising concern for the state of England's waterways, with a part of the River Thames that's to be used for the boat race this weekend found to be contaminated with E. coli. A mural by Banksy in North London has been fenced off by a local council. The artwork in Finsbury Park features splashes of green paint on a residential building behind a cut-back tree, giving the appearance of lush green leaves. Credit was claimed by the street artist on his social media, but just days later it was vandalised with white paint. Islington Council says it's discussing future solutions with the homeowner that will enable everyone to enjoy the artwork while also protecting it. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2612 and €1.1660 euros. The price of gold is £1,733.64 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,902 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Want to be a winner just like Phil?
Obviously, whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
Enter our massive spring giveaway. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:40. We can now bring you a GB News exclusive. Last February, transgender teenager Brianna Ghey was murdered. She was stabbed 28 times by two 15-year-olds she thought were her friends.
Her mother, Esther, has spoken to this show and is campaigning for child-safe phones for under-16s, which she believes would have saved her daughter's life. Our reporter, Eleanor Smith, brings us this report.
Was the life and soul of the party, I suppose, and she was so outgoing and she was so out there, and yeah, she was also very defiant, and she would do whatever she wanted to do.
This is the last time transgender teenager Brianna Ghey left her house. She was murdered in February last year, stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife by Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, two 15-year-olds she thought were her friends. Brianna's mum Esther thinks all of this could have been avoided if social media safeguards had blocked her daughter's killers from looking at torture and murder online.
Children have access to absolutely everything that's in the world now. The content that they might access and the content that they're then refed through the algorithm, it's kind of radicalising children.
And it wasn't just Scarlett and Eddie that were accessing dangerous content online. Esther believes that part of the reason Brianna was so vulnerable was because she was addicted to her phone.
When Brianna was with us, it was a massive argument point in our house. I was worried about what she was accessing online. I've lost Brianna at a very young, when she was very young, and I wish that we didn't have all of those arguments. I wish that it was, I kind of wish that I had that support as a parent in the first place.
And if not... And Esther's not alone. Tory MP and child safety campaigner Miriam Cates believes smartphones are damaging a whole generation of children.
It's becoming increasingly clear that smartphones and social media have had a very detrimental impact on children and childhood. And if you look at any measure of children and teen well-being, so whether that's depression, anxiety, actual suicide, all of those measures have gone off a cliff since 2010, 2012, when smartphones and social media became ubiquitous for children. We've got to stop it quickly, otherwise we are condemning our further generation to that kind of mental health problem.
While it's too late for Brianna, Esther says she won't stop campaigning to make sure it doesn't happen again.
She struggled for a couple of years before she passed away, And for me, that just feels like such a waste of life. And if I can make things better for other young people, then I'll keep working in order to do that.
Eleanor?
Terribly, terribly sad. I mean, it's clear a lot of parents just do not know what their children are accessing on their mobile phones, whether it's who they're communicating with, whether it's what they're seeing on social media. And I think depending on the child, and I'm talking in general, but depending on the child, it can have a really detrimental impact on mood, on their anxiety levels, on self-esteem and the way they view themselves, constant comparisons being made. Yes, it can be a tool for good. Of course it can. And it can connect people who would never have been connected before, and they can share hobbies and interests and all of that. But I think something needs to change in terms of our relationship with our mobile phones and social media, because I do think for a lot of children, it is quite damaging.
I think it's interesting how Esther Jai, speaking to us there, wasn't necessarily talking about social media when it came to the death of Brianna. She was talking about what Brianna Jai's killers were looking up on their phones, what they were doing on the internet in general, what videos they were watching. This isn't stuff that was on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. This was stuff that was on darker and deeper corners of the internet. And
it opens up the conversation, doesn't it? I mean, we heard from Miriam Cates in that report about social media in general and the impact of smartphones on children's well-being. And, for example, you could see something on social media and it could lead you through a rabbit hole into darker content. I mean, take, for example, eating disorders. It used to be a massive trend that people would find pictures that were encouraging people to lose weight, glorifying losing weight. And lots of young girls, and also boys, got stuck in this trap of thinking they shouldn't eat, and we're just getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier and more unhealthy and more depressed, frankly.
We talk about this data as if it's absolutely unambiguous, but it isn't unambiguous. I mean, the suicide rate for young girls, as it stands this decade, is not different to that it was in previous decades. I think
I completely disagree with you on this one, because I do think social media... Yes, but not everything you can just prove through data, and you've got to look at who funds that data and everything that goes into those kind of reports, because how children, teenagers, parents, schools... Everyone you talk to is concerned with the impact that social media and some media sites are happening on children's minds. You're hugely impressionable. I, for one, probably think that children were happier when they didn't have their noses in social media, thinking that everyone else has a better life than them, going down horribly damaging rabbit holes, feeling like they've been left out from this party, or they don't have any friends, or they're being bullied, joining WhatsApp groups where people are calling them names. I genuinely do. I'm not calling for a ban on social media, not calling for a ban on phones for young people, but I do think it's something we have to be mindful of. And I think the amount of time children are spending in their rooms just looking at their phone is not good. I mean, not least because they could be reading books.
Isn't this a role for parents?
Yeah.
Isn't this a role for parents to make sure that what children access, and when we say children, there's a wealth of difference between someone who's 8 years old and someone who's 16 years old.
Yeah.
These are two completely different categories of people. And I worry about placing the same rules, just saying the word children and just assuming that all of these people are precisely the same. Perhaps a graduated access to this stuff, more tools for parents to use, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. I know, growing up, that I had friends all over the world. There are so many brilliant advances that have been made in connecting people. I suppose to some extent it's about marrying the good with safety, rather than one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, I think fundamentally parents do need to take an active role in what their children are looking at. And of course, children and teenagers aren't going to want their parents to be looking at their phones, but perhaps that is necessary considering the dangers, the very real dangers that there are. Anyway, coming up, we'll be getting to your views on all of the stories covered. Let us know what you make of this whole discussion around phones, social media. Do you think something needs to be done? Is it down to the parents just to, keep an eye on what's going on with their children. GBViews at gbnews.com. Stay with us.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
This story caught my eye. Lloyds Bank, right, they own the insurance company Scottish Widows. They have now issued some kind of suggested guidance about which word to try and avoid upsetting people or perhaps be as inclusive as possibly can be. One of these words is widows, which really caught my eye because of the amount of stupidity. If you own a brand literally called Scottish Widows, you can't then be saying that the word widows is triggering and offensive. Anyway, because it is so ludicrous, I need to move over from that part because I want to talk about the broader issue. So many organisations, they have what they call ESG. I'm going to bring a graphic up on the screen in case you're not familiar with what this is. But it's a sense of kind of government, and I would say it's almost like a spine. It underpins so much of what business does today. It stands for environmental, social and governance. And it's around things like how does a business perform when it comes to their environmental impact? How diverse are their employees? How diverse is their board? And so on and so forth. Do you think ESG is a force for good and much needed within business or not, Ben?
It is the introduction of systemic institutionalised prejudice in the United Kingdom, which is going to damage dreadfully our economy, but also our culture, our cohesion as a society, and it's undermining, again, coming back to it, the nation-state that is the United Kingdom. ESG has to be ditched.
Strong words. Judita, do you agree with him?
I don't agree, because I think that with ESG, when you have them, what you're having an increase in is specialists in ESG being introduced into companies to kind of imbricate it into how the company functions. If you're moving in a direction of making your company's functionality be optimized in a way that is inclusive of anyone from any background who has the qualifications to occupy that position, that is a good thing.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 2 and an update now on that huge story of that bridge collapse in the United States yesterday.
Yes, audio of the emergency crews responding to reports of the collision has now been released. Should we take a listen?
I need one of you guys on the south side, one of you guys on the north side, hold all traffic on the Key Bridge. There's a ship approaching that just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we got to stop all traffic.
F4L, I'm en route to the south side.
Dispatch start.
I'm holding traffic now. I was dragging, but we stopped prior to the bridge, so I'll have all outer loop traffic stopped.
10-4, is there a crew working on the bridge right now?
291 to do.
Good.
Want me to stop traffic on this site right now?
Yeah, if we can stop traffic, just make sure no one's on the bridge right now. I'm not sure where. If there's a crew up there, we might want to notify whoever the foreman is, see if we can get them off the bridge temporarily.
10-4, once the other unit gets here, I'll ride up on the bridge. I have all interloop traffic stopped at this time. Once you get here, I'll go grab the workers on the Key Bridge and then stop the outer loop. C-13 dispatch, the whole bridge just fell down. Start, whoever, everybody. The whole bridge just collapsed.
10-4 dispatch is direct.
That's correct. This time.
Do we know if all traffic was stopped?
I can't get to the other side, sir. The bridge is down. We're going to have to get somebody on the other side, the Anne Arundel County MSP, to get up here and stop traffic coming northbound on the T Bridge.
C-13, I'm holding all traffic northbound.
It's just astonishing, isn't it?
Those moments leading up to the collapse of the bridge, and then once it had, the emergency services there scrambling around to try and stop the traffic, and then realising that the bridge had just collapsed.
But it does show that they were doing everything they could. As soon as they knew that that boat had lost its capability to steer, that ship, not that boat, as soon as they realised that ship had lost its ability to steer, they tried to stop traffic. And I think this is that probably saved lives, that quick thinking of those officials, because there are 6 people now presumed dead, but none of them were passengers or those in traffic on the bridge. It was those people working on the bridge. So it could be that the quick thinking of those people, of those voices that we just heard, they could have saved many lives.
Yes, it's interesting they've released this audio, perhaps to demonstrate how the emergency services kicked into action at a time of crisis. Now, earlier this morning, one of the missing 6 workers was identified dead as Miguel Euna from El Salvador by the non-profit organisation CASA. There he is, Miguel Euna from El Salvador.
But of course, there are 6 missing workers. Well, 5 now missing, 1 identified, 5 more presumed dead as well. But as we say, just those workers on the bridge, there were a lot of fears that there could have been cars going over there too. This could perhaps have been a much bigger loss of life, and perhaps quick thinking might have saved lives there.
Well, coming up, stick with us. There's some news from the Abdul Izadi case.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weather remains very lively. Heavy downpours across much of the UK today. It's still pretty gusty and blustery as well. And here's the reason why. Low pressure continues to dominate. These weather fronts spiralling bands of rain across the UK. It's been particularly wet in Northern Ireland. Weather warning in place here until 3 this afternoon. A line of rain working its way into eastern England. Ahead of that, we have seen some sunshine, some sunny spells following, but also a whole host of blustery showers blown in by a gusty wind, and the wet weather across Scotland, falling as rain at low levels, but some snow over the higher routes possible here. Cold feeling day in northern Scotland, 6 or 7 elsewhere. Well, just about double digits, but still feeling chilly for the end of March. More heavy showers will spread northwards overnight, and this zone of wet weather will be, again, mostly rain at low levels, but could provide some snow, particularly across parts of the West Midlands, up towards North Wales, down towards Gloucestershire for tomorrow morning. It's going to turn windy again through tomorrow as well, particularly from the southwest as further rain comes in here. It'll be a chilly night in Scotland, touch of frost here, but northern Scotland should see some sunny spells during Thursday. Another band of rain then swings up from the south, and very blustery conditions along the south coast. There's a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds. And again, from mid-morning onwards, it's another day of heavy showers, and again, feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weather remains very lively. Heavy downpours across much of the UK today. It's still pretty gusty and blustery as well. And here's the reason why. Low pressure continues to dominate. These weather fronts spiralling bands of rain across the UK. It's been particularly wet in Northern Ireland. Weather warning in place here until 3 this afternoon. A line of rain working its way into eastern England. Ahead of that, we have seen some sunshine, some sunny spells following, but also a whole host of blustery showers blown in by a gusty wind, and the wet weather across Scotland, falling as rain at low levels, but some snow over the higher routes possible here. cold feeling day in northern Scotland, 6 or 7. Elsewhere, well, just about double digits, but still feeling chilly for the end of March. More heavy showers will spread northwards overnight, and this zone of wet weather will be, again, mostly rain at low levels, but could provide some snow, particularly across parts of the West Midlands, up towards North Wales, down towards Gloucestershire for tomorrow morning. It's going to turn windy again through tomorrow as well, particularly from the southwest as further rain comes in here. It'll be a chilly night in Scotland, touch of frost here, but northern Scotland should see some sunny spells during Thursday. Another band of rain then swings up from the south and very blustery conditions along the south coast. There's a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds. And again, from mid-morning onwards, it's another day of heavy showers. And again, feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 27th of March.
The shocking figures that reveal spills of raw sewage into England's rivers and seas are the worst on record. Last year, there were more than 3 million hours of spillage. Who's to blame and what can be done now?
We'll get more on that bridge collapse in Baltimore. 6 missing workers are now presumed dead, and new, dramatic audio of the emergency crews responding has in the last hour been released.
And Brits fighting for Putin in Ukraine. We asked the question, should these people, some calling absolute traitors, receive the Shamima Begum treatment and be stripped of their British citizenship? And get this, on the Abdul Azaidi case, Abdul Azaidi, the convicted sex offender who then went on to pursue a vicious chemical attack, he was given a Muslim burial despite apparently converting to Christianity. What do you make of that, Tom?
This is someone who claimed to be Christian, was granted leave to remain in the United Kingdom on the basis of being Christian, leafleted for a Christian church in order to then be granted asylum here in the United Kingdom.
Needed a male chaperone to go to the church on a Sunday, presumably so that he didn't do anything untoward.
If anything, he should be given a Christian funeral, perhaps a Viking burial.
Well, clearly his friends and family did not believe that he was a Christian and renounced his Muslim faith.
Well, he couldn't even decide if he was Shia or Sunni. Those were the early reports. He was claiming to be one and then the other on the basis that would get him the best chance of asylum. I'm interested to know, did he have a Shia funeral or a Sunni Muslim funeral?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear now, as clear as it can be, that he pretended to be a Christian and that there was no real conversion and that it was all a bit of a sham to be able to stay in this country.
And
so
then to go and attack a woman with a corrosive substance, a man who was already a convicted sex offender. Frankly, why is he getting a funeral at all?
Yeah, and the judge just, ruled in his favour, despite being told by the Home Office that he's a proven liar and being given evidence. Anyway, GBViews at gbnews.com. What do you make of that? But let's get your headlines.
Emily, thank you. The top stories. Audio has emerged detailing the moment that emergency workers tried to evacuate the bridge in Baltimore shortly before it collapsed.
There's a ship approaching. It just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we got to stop all traffic.
C-13 dispatch. The whole bridge just fell down. Start, whoever, everybody. The whole bridge just collapsed.
It comes after the search for survivors was suspended, with 6 construction workers presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge yesterday morning. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. Less than 1 in 4 people in Britain are satisfied with the NHS, its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with lack of access to GPs among the top concerns. A poll found that long waiting times are also a major worry, with just 24% saying they're satisfied with the health service. That's down from 70% in 2010. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government is committed to making things better.
The NHS has had, to deal with the pandemic, and we all know that that has created huge backlogs and huge waiting lists, and we're all committed to catch up, to provide a faster, simpler, fairer NHS. We're investing £165 billion a year. Obviously, if you're investing that much, you want to have people satisfied with the service they're getting. But we do know that we've been tackling, think for the last 4 months, the waiting lists have started to come down, but we're tackling a huge backlog. What's interesting is actually England, the Conservative-run England, the performance and the catch-up is much better than in Labour-run Wales or in SNP-run Scotland.
Public satisfaction with social care has also plummeted to just 13%. We asked people in Manchester for their thoughts on Britain's health service.
Once you get there, yes, but it's actually getting through the GP to getting to the NHS. I think that a lot of money is wasted talking to people that work or have worked within the NHS. The amount of waste is phenomenal. So I think they need to look at the management. It needs to start at the top.
Thankfully, I don't use it a lot, but I'm currently on the waiting list for one of the hospitals in Manchester for 12, and it's a 52-week wait.
We should make it like a more accessible thing.
I am satisfied because there's a lot of hard-working nurses, doctors, surgeons. Like, you see the care they give you. And plus, I had 3 of my children here, and the care I received was perfect.
There was a 54% increase in sewage in England's waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. It comes amid rising concern for the state of England's waterways, with a part of the River Thames that's to be used for the boat race this weekend found to be contaminated with E. coli. Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reed says water company bosses who oversee the pollution of waterways should be banned from getting bonuses.
It's absolutely disgusting that last year we had the highest level of sewage being pumped into our rivers, our lakes and our seas on record. Over 4 million hours this filth was being pumped out into our waterways, and yet the government has stood back and done nothing while it's getting worse and worse.
A review has found that a 10-month-old baby who was murdered by his parents just weeks after being handed back to them should have been in protective care. Finley Bowden's parents, Shannon Marsden and Stephen Bowden, inflicted over 100 injuries on their son before he died at his family home in Chesterfield, Derbyshire on Christmas Day in 2020. They were given life sentences in May that year. A safeguarding review found practices in the local authority were inadequate. It said that while Finley's parents were responsible for his death, professional interventions should have protected him. And a mural by Banksy in North London has been fenced off by a local council. The artwork in Finsbury Park features splashes of green paint on a residential building behind a cut-back tree, giving the appearance of lush green leaves. Credit was claimed by the street artist on social media, but just days later it was vandalised with white paint. Islington Council says it's discussing future solutions with the homeowner that will enable everyone to enjoy the artwork while also protecting it. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
It's 2:08. Now, sewage spills have hit a record high, with waste leaking into rivers and seas more than doubling in the last year. Figures released by the Environment Agency show there were 3.6 million hours of spills compared to 1.75 million hours in 2022. So a rather large increase.
Certainly. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows, with untreated sewage dumped in rivers and seas mixed in with rainwater from all of those storms. But these spills are now at their highest since 2016.
Well, GB News' East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us now from Gedling in Nottingham. Will, what do we know about the situation there in Nottingham? Are we seeing sewage spills in the river you're standing in front of?
Yes, well, campaigners say that this is the final damning indictment of a failing industry. Where we are in Gedling, this is a very small part of the water system. It's called the Ouse Dyke, and if you follow it down, it will eventually lead to the River Trent, which is the third largest river in the entire country. And last year, this data reveals that 315 hours worth of sewage was spilled into this very small section. Now, that's around 13 days of continual untreated sewage being pumped into this waterway. But we know that that is just a very small fraction of the picture nationally. The data revealed today says that this is on record levels, 3.6 million hours worth of sewage released in 2023 across the water companies. That's more than double what it was in 2022. Now, the Environment Agency says that while this is disappointing, it's not entirely surprising. The government says that this is unacceptable, something that the water companies say that they echo. But the reason that they're giving for why this is happening is because of essentially extreme weather, the 6th wettest year on record last year. They say as well that the places where they record this, the overflows, have been recorded at 100% last year for the very first time, so that means that the data is much more comprehensive compared to previous years. Now, the water company says that they do have a plan to triple investment by the year 2030, and Ofwat simply needs to sign off on that. And when they do that, it will reduce spillages down by 40%. But Labour says that by preventing bonuses for the CEOs of these massive companies, that will make things happen a lot quicker.
Thank you, Will. Let's hope that the river behind you isn't as putrid as some of our waterways are at the moment, seemingly. Let's get more on this now with Robert Colville, the Director of the Centre for Policy Studies and Editor-in-Chief of CapX. Now, Robert, people will be saying the reason why these storm overflows happen and our waters are being polluted are because these nasty companies simply haven't invested enough. Are they right?
No, it's really, being someone who in any way defends the water companies is the least popular position in British politics. But the truth is, this all dates back to the way that the Victorians built our water network, designed our network, and paths that they followed since then. And what they essentially decided to do was to put the rain and the poo in the same pipe, which turns out not to have been the best idea, but we're kind of stuck with that. The government set up a task force on overflows a few years ago, and it found that to completely fix this problem would cost between 350 and 600 billion pounds.
But Robert, I've read that only about 12% of the network dates back to the Victorian era. Are you saying that we haven't changed up the design since then?
We have changed up the design, but only more recently. The Victorian set the sort of path dependency for the rest of the network to follow. Nowadays, when you build a house and when you build a development, you would try and separate those out. But the other thing that people don't understand here is about monitoring. So we are saying these are record levels, but the truth is we have absolutely no idea whether these are record levels, because this is the first year in which we've had monitoring at every single outflow. As recently as 2010, we were monitoring just 7% of outflows. So, I mean, and by the way, in Scotland and quite a lot of other European countries, they still don't have anything like the monitoring system we've got in. So what I think it's far more likely we are discovering a problem that has been happening for decades, rather than that there has been a sudden growth of this problem just when we happen to have installed all of the devices to monitor it.
But hang on, these water companies, according to Labour analysis, have received the bosses of these companies have received £25 million in the way of bonuses and other cash incentives. And at the same time, they're asking Ofwat to approve 40% increase in our bills. It does seem like the bill payers are the losers, not the water companies.
Well, the bill payers are going to be the losers here, but that's because we are going to have to spend more on our infrastructure. In fact, the way that our water network works is since privatisation, investment has actually increased quite substantially.
Wait, just say that again, because a lot of people say that privatisation is the reason that we're not investing enough. Are you saying since privatisation, investment has actually gone up?
Gone up very, very significantly. There's absolutely no argument about that. And in fact, the latest figures published by the European Water Network from 2021 showed that we are investing more in our water network than absolutely anyone else. The issue is that is still not enough. People are really concerned about the quality of their water. They want it to get. They're newly aware of these problems, and they want it to. And the climate is changing, the population is growing, and they want to get better. But the way the system works is that water companies are effectively sort of agents acting on behalf of the state. The state tells them how much leakage they can have, it tells them what prices they can charge, and if they say to the state, hey, we really want to, there are really good examples of them saying, we want to invest more, we want to build reservoirs, we want to, to do this, because we will make more money from investing more, because we are allowed to make a set figure depending on how much we invest. And the regulator and the government have told them no, either because people don't want reservoirs built near them or because they are worried that bills will get too high. But we're now at the stage where that's run out of road. Whoever runs the water network, whether it's private, whether it's national, whoever does it, is going to need to spend a lot more money because we have more people and we have a more hostile climate, and we have too much water in some places and not enough in others. And we really need to fix that. But that is going to cost money, and there's no magic solution to that.
That is really, really fascinating. The investment went up post-privatisation, but perhaps not by enough. And maybe we've always had this problem, but we're just monitoring, 7% monitoring in 2010, now to 100% monitoring. That's a huge monitoring increase. Really, really interesting stuff there. Just finally, Robert Colville, is the only answer then that we're going to have to pay more? And who will have to pay?
Yeah, so every few years, the water companies come to the government or the regulator and say, this is how much we want to spend on the water network, and this is how much that will involve bills going up. And at the moment, they are saying we want to spend huge amounts on the water network, and that will involve bills going up by £156. That's obviously not going to be that popular with the public, but if you want to fix these problems, it will require billions and billions of pounds. To fix. And just saying that the water companies took dividends and loaded up on debt, yes, they did. That wasn't very good of them, but you can't fix the current situation just by sort of shouting at the water company bosses. We are actually going to need to spend money.
Well, there you go, some food for thought. Thank you very much indeed. Robert Colville, Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Good to speak to you. A short statement from Water UK. These results are unacceptable and demonstrate exactly why we urgently need regulatory approval to upgrade our systems so it can better cope with the weather. There you go.
Well, reports have revealed that convicted sex offender and chemical attacker Abdullah Zaidi was given a Muslim burial, despite being given asylum after converting to Christianity.
Yes, new court documents reveal the chemical attacker was granted asylum, even though the judge knew there were concerns about him being a proven liar.
So, do these new revelations undermine the entire asylum process? And how does it damage the reputation of Christian churches.
Well, joining us now is priest in charge at Holy Trinity in Winchester and host of the Irreverent podcast, Father Jamie Franklin. Thank you very much for joining us, Jamie. Now, there's been a big blame game when it comes to this case. People blaming the government, the Home Office, the Church of England for allowing the conversion and for backing the asylum case here. And also, who else have we blamed? The police, perhaps. So, Jamie, what do you make of this? And has this damaged the reputation of the Church of England? We know the Archbishop of Canterbury is looking into an investigation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think, yeah, it doesn't look good, obviously. One thing I would say at the beginning, though, is that I find it hard to understand why people are blaming the Church of England for this, because this happened in the context of a Baptist church. The minister involved was a man called Reverend Roy Merrin. This has been widely reported in the Telegraph and elsewhere. It was actually a Baptist church minister, and it was a Baptist church context in which Yazidi was allowed to known that he was a convicted sex offender. He'd been convicted of sexual assault and exposure. These are just facts about what was going on at the time. So it was actually Reverend Roy Merrin and that context there. And then it was the Reverend Roy Merrin who actually supported his application for asylum in this country. So it was in the context of the Baptist Church, not the Church of England. The Church of England, perhaps has a role to play insofar as it's promoting this sort of liberal progressive agenda around immigration in quite a public and visible way. But in this context, definitely not the Church of England's fault. There has also been massive amount of miscommunication between the Home Office and the tribunal that vindicated Yazidi. The Home Office knew about, the tribunal that allowed his asylum application to go through. The Home Office knew that this guy was a sex offender and that he was dangerous as well. So it's a failure on a state and legislative level as well as anything else. So I think the blame can be widely shared around. But in this instance, I would say it's not actually the fault of the Church of England.
And also the judge too, who ruled in his favour despite what I would call overwhelming evidence that this man was lying.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, to me, this speaks to the broader context of this entire conversation. It's a source of frustration, I think, to many, many people, including lots of just ordinary parishioners in Church of England churches and Christians elsewhere, that the kind of people who represent the hierarchical echelons of the church don't seem to get the concerns that ordinary people have around immigration. These people are not racist. They don't hate people from other nations. They just want a sensible conversation around this issue, in the same way as you wouldn't allow anyone to just walk into your house and behave however they wanted in front of your family members. So we shouldn't allow just anyone to come into the country, anyone and everyone to come into the country and to behave however they want, just because they make the claim that they are fleeing persecution or that they're in need or whatever it might be. That we need to have a sensible grown-up conversation about this where both sides of this story are considered. And the government, I would hasten to add, have a duty to protect the population of their own nation, as well as let's say, a burden of care for people who might want to come here to seek asylum or to seek refuge. And in this case, we badly failed these people, this mother and her daughters who have had their lives upended through this horrific attack, a chemical attack upon them through this man who should not have been roaming around in our country. So this is absolutely disgraceful. And I hope it moves the conversation in a positive direction as a result.
Perhaps more of the focus needs to be on the judge and that judgment rather than the inputs that went into that judgment. Just on the fact that that Abdullah Zaidi seems to have had a Muslim burial, should he have?
Well, I don't know. I don't know from a sort of moral perspective or a legal perspective, but I think what it shows is that the Reverend Roy and whoever else was involved from a Christian perspective were either utterly duped by this man and were taken for fools, or were actually duplicitous in what happened and knew this bloke wasn't a Christian and that he was in fact a Muslim, but supported his application anyway, which would be incredibly dishonest. And I don't know which is the case. But either way, it is pretty shocking, I would say. And also, one does wonder if this kind of thing is happening more broadly. I mean, look, I don't live in an area where this kind of thing happens. I'll be honest. I live in the south in Winchester. This isn't happening here. But is this happening elsewhere in the country? Do we have vicars and ministers up and down the country using this loophole as a way of supporting people's asylum application when they very well know that these people
Jamie,
aren't Christians?
we know that 40, or at least a couple dozen, a few dozen, on the Bibi Stockholm barge were looking to
suddenly
convert.
deciding that they're going to be Christians.
So it's certainly not the only case where there may be very quick conversions done.
As I say, they're either dupes or they're duplicitous. It's one of the two, isn't it? It's not particularly. It doesn't speak in their favour, let's say, as ministers, that they would either allow themselves to be fooled or actually be dishonest in this case. But there we go.
You speak a lot of sense, Father Jamie Franklin, host of the Irreverend podcast. I like the pun there. Thank you very much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Well, still to come, we've got dramatic audio of the emergency crews responding to the bridge collapse in Baltimore. That's been released in the last hour. More on that after the break.
Garage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Serving police officers, showing that up to 20% of them are thinking about quitting the force and doing so within the next year or two. What on earth is going wrong? Problem, of course, is that those that go will be the experienced ones to be replaced by inexperienced ones. Kevin Hurley, former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Met Police, joins me from his home in Surrey. Kevin, this figure is shocking.
The terms and conditions have really dropped off under Theresa May's, what I would describe as an attack on the police service, where their pay has really dropped off, spending power down about 22% on what it once was. Worse still, the golden handcuffs, which were once the excellent police pension, have been taken away and the pension is now much reduced. The other thing that's killing them is the constant media and activist battering for police officers. Off the back of that, one psychopath and the other, if you like, Tinder rapist, everybody now thinks the police are kind of all like that. What that means for the individual patrol officers, they're being given stick everywhere. For example, their bosses left, right and centre are rolling over. Oh, yes, we're institutionally racist. What that means for a 25-year-old constable working in Balham High Street is everyone screaming at him, you're a racist pig. They get surrounded on the streets when they try and do a stop and search or an arrest. Add to that the fact that the criminal justice system is collapsing. They're tipping out the prisons with early releases. So, because of course there's no prison space, cases are taking years to get to court. They're getting derisory sentences because there's no room in the prisons. All of that's really demoralising for the police.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 2 and we're going to bring you the latest from the United States. After a container ship hit a bridge in Baltimore yesterday, this dramatic scene of the bridge fully collapsing. Well, earlier this morning, one of the missing 6 workers was identified dead as Miguel Iona from El Salvador by the non-profit organisation CASA.
Well, now audio of the emergency crews responding to reports of the collision has been released. Let's take a listen.
I need one of you guys on the south side, one of you guys on the north side, hold all traffic on the Key Bridge. There's a ship approaching has just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we got to stop all traffic.
Yeah, I'm en route to the south side.
Dispatch direction.
I'm holding traffic now. I was dragging, but we stopped prior to the bridge, so I'll have all out of loop traffic stopped.
10-4. Is there a crew working on the bridge right now?
291, but
God.
Want me to stop traffic on this site right now?
Yeah, if we can stop traffic, just make sure no one's on the bridge right now. I'm not sure where. There's a crew up there. We might want to notify whoever the foreman is, see if we can get them off the bridge temporarily.
10-4. Once the other unit gets here, I'll ride up on the bridge. I have all interloop traffic stopped at this time. Once you get here, I'll go grab the workers on the Key Bridge and then stop the outer loop.
C-13 dispatch, the whole bridge just fell down. Start whoever, everybody. The whole bridge just collapsed.
Simple dispatch is direct. That's correct. This time.
Do we know if all traffic was stopped?
I can't get to the other side, sir. The bridge is down. We're going to have to get somebody on the other side, the Anne Arundel County MSP, to get up here and stop traffic coming northbound on the Key Bridge.
C-13, I'm holding all traffic northbound.
Just astonishing audio, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Joining us now is Associate Publisher for the Baltimore Times, Paris Brown. Paris, very much appreciate you coming on the show. I'm sure you're very busy in light of everything that's happened over the last, day and a bit. Paris, what's the mood in Baltimore? We just heard that astonishing audio.
Well, believe it or not, the city's come together, the interagencies have come together. Our mayor, our governor, our president has been very, very supportive. And it's really, we're going to get through this. It is, they're saying Maryland strong, Baltimore strong. We are in prayer across the state and really across the nation for those who have lost their lives because they're families. And that is the sentiment here.
Listening to that audio, it was remarkable to see those who were managing the traffic responding quite so quickly. They knew that the ship had lost control. They seemingly closed traffic to the bridge in time for there not to be any cars caught up in this collapse.
And that's what we're so grateful for. So many lives that were saved. At the time, it was 1:30, so there was no traffic. There wasn't any, what we would say, rush hour traffic. And yes, being able to stop the loops and stop the traffic saved a lot of lives. During rush hour, there are close to like 35,000 cars that pass that bridge daily. So the quick response was incredible. We salute those, and not only those that helped to stop that traffic, but the first responders. They were there in minutes to help rescue the two that were saved.
I mean, Paris, you talk about a huge amount of support for the emergency services and, of course, those who have been caught up in this tragic event. Is there also some anger about how this could have happened?
Well, at this point, no, that's not being expressed, right? There are more pressing issues. We do have the recovery, and then most importantly, getting the port open, because millions of dollars are being lost, right, with it not being open. And so there's a sentiment that let's rally around, let's support Baltimore, and let's get our harbor up and running again. As you already know, the supply chain is impacted. Baltimore is the 11th busiest port in the United States, and is the busiest port for vehicles coming into the country. So this has economic impact also. that we have to address immediately.
Yes, and the focus will now turn on to getting the debris cleared, getting the port open. It's a hugely significant deep water harbour that can take ships like this. Very few harbours on the east coast can take large container ships. Do we have any indication about the clean-up operation and how quickly this harbour can get back open?
We don't, and you're absolutely right. I think it's about 135 feet deep. It is very deep. So right now there is no one, actually none of the ships can go in and out. And so we have not had any updates yet, but I do know that is a priority.
Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Paris Brown, Associate Publisher for the Baltimore Times. Really great to get your insight. Yes, that economic impact.
Yes. Yeah, it's not just the lives, it's the livelihoods.
Yeah.
And frankly, everyone's Amazon parcels are on board that ship.
Well, of course, but coming up, a pair of British men have been branded as traitors and an absolute disgrace for proudly fighting for the Russian army in Ukraine. We'll have more on that after your headlines.
Emily, thank you. The top stories. Audio has emerged detailing the moment that emergency workers tried to evacuate the bridge in Baltimore shortly before it collapsed.
There's a ship approaching has just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we got to stop all traffic.
C-13 dispatch, the whole bridge just fell down. Start, everybody. The whole bridge just collapsed.
It comes after the search for survivors was suspended with 6 construction workers presumed dead. Video footage captured the moment a cargo ship crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge yesterday morning. The city's port, which is one of the busiest in the east of the United States, is now closed indefinitely. A poll has found that less than 1 in 4 people in Britain are satisfied with the NHS, its lowest level since records began 40 years ago, with lack of access to GPs among the top concerns. Long waiting times are also a major worry, with just 24% saying they're satisfied with the health service. That's down from 70% in 2010. The report found that tightening funding and chronic workforce shortages over the past decade has left the NHS in a continual state of crisis. There was a 54% increase in sewage in England's waterways last year compared to 2022, pushing figures to their highest level. The Environment Agency says it's due to storm overflows with untreated sewage dumped into rivers and seas. Labour says it will put water companies under special measures if it wins the next election, with bosses who oversee the pollution of waterways banned from getting bonuses. And lawmakers in Thailand have voted overwhelmingly in support of same-sex marriage. It's an historic step for one of Asia's most liberal countries and will make it the only nation in Southeast Asia to recognise same-sex unions. It comes after years of campaigning and a bill that's almost 10 years in the making. It's expected to be passed into law by the end of the year. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
It's the final week to see how you could win big. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash that you could spend however you like. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker so you can listen to GB News on the go. You have to hurry as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 2, and a pair of British men have been branded as traitors and an absolute disgrace for proudly fighting for Putin's Russian army in Ukraine.
Yes, the men Ben Stimpson and Aidan Minnis have posted pictures of themselves online in all the Russian military gear, brandishing grenades and guns. Their decision to fight for Russia in President Putin's war of conquest has led to calls for them to be jailed if they ever step foot in Britain again. So what should be done with these two?
And what legally can be done with these little rodenty people? Well, let's get the thoughts now from the former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, what does the law say here? We're not technically at war with Russia, but we're not exactly their allies.
No, we aren't at war with Russia, so it really depends partly on the circumstances of how they've joined the Russian army if we're not at war with them. Technically, that wouldn't be an offence in the way that, for example, people joining the Ukrainian Legion, not being mercenaries, as long as they're integrated into the army, would be a legitimate part of that army grouping. But if they were to come back to the UK, there's a body of law which you could use in lots of ways. So the first thing is we put the Counter-Terrorism Security Act together in 2015 to stop people travelling. Now, I'm not sure if that was technically used in terms of travel to Russia via third parties, which we think Stimpson did. But when they come back, you could do them under counter-terrorist legislation. The second thing is that the Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870 has been there. We were going to use that in the Spanish Civil War to take on those who fought for the Republican side, and in the 70s of those who fought in the Civil War for the FNLA in Angola. It's never been used, but there is a large body of a law which you can use to deal with these people should they come back. It's worth saying, I think, that the biggest value of them is not as fighting entities for the Russians, it's for information operations. It's this sort of thing about, hey, there were Brits who are fighting for us against those terrible fascists and Nazis in Ukraine, which is slightly weird in its own way, because one of these was a former National Front member.
Yes, all about the propaganda. It's curious, though, because one of these men, Ben Stimpson, reading he was previously convicted for terrorism, for helping pro-Russian separatists. I would have thought that would have given some kind of red flag when he left Britain, you know, at the airport. Are you just allowed to travel freely, even if you've got a terror conviction?
Yeah, that's the curious one here, because he seemed to have been in the Donbass in 2015 and to have done over 5 years in prison under terrorism legislation. Now, he could have been technically stopped for travelling or to have been on a no-fly list. Why he wasn't and why he was allowed to travel, admittedly, as I said, it was via a third-party country, because I think he went via Istanbul, not directly to Russia. That is something which I think the authorities will have to explain.
There will be people who just look at this and think, why should we ever allow these people back in the country? I suppose, given the rate of attrition of Russian troops, there's a chance that they might sort of answer that question in and of themselves, depending on how long they stay in the trenches. But what recourse do we have?
Well, you can temporarily ban them, again, under that 2015 legislation, and you can manage their return and therefore manage what is done to them in legal terms. Again, your second point, Tom, about them being in the trenches, that really depends on their contract. If they are on a long contract with the Russians, then they are likely to be cannon fodder, and the best thing that will happen to them is that they'll be pushing up the daisies in the next few months. But as I said at the beginning of this, their bigger value is really as information operations and propaganda for the Russians. If I was the Russians, I wouldn't use them for that. I would use them for other means. And therefore, we've got to be quite careful of giving these miscreants, because they are sort of drug-addled alcoholics of the past, the sort of too much oxygen of publicity.
Yeah, we shouldn't ever talk about them as if they're representative of some big movement in the United Kingdom. These are two peculiar little oddballs.
But if they're thinking perhaps they'll get to the stage where they've had enough and they don't fancy working for Putin's Russia anymore and backing the army, whether it's actually with combat and fighting, or if this is more about the propaganda war, and they want to come back to Britain. I mean, is there any way that they could be treated in the same way as, say, Shamima Begum, whose citizenship was stripped? I mean, presumably Putin would be happy for them to be Russian citizens.
Yeah, that's technically, if they were offered Russian citizenship, they could do that. Now, we couldn't strip the citizenship from them because they're not dual nationals, in the way that Shamima Begum, we used a thing called jus sanguinis, where we could use the inheritance through the father, i.e. the paternal line of the Bangladeshi thing, so that wasn't deemed to be illegal. To make them stateless would be illegal, and you technically can't do that in international law.
Well, Chip Chapman, thank you so much for talking us through this slightly peculiar story of two oddballs, one with a terrorism conviction, one a former member of a far-right organisation in the United Kingdom, dancing to Putin's tune out in Ukraine. Really, really bizarre stuff. But Major General Chip Chapman, thanks for your time.
Yes, and they clearly are the most tremendous show-offs too. I mean, boasting about it, parading the guns and talking about grenades and all that. Yes, tough men, eh?
Oh, yeah, so tough.
Anyway, coming up, we'll be getting to all of your views on all the stories we've been talking about, including those two men that have gone off to Putin's Russia, but also the NHS, Sewage. We've talked about it. We'll see what you think.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Can the Church of England not spend their money as they wish?
The Church of England can do amazing things for this country and for the world, and I'm not sure why it's chosen to focus on this specific issue. You know, one of the causes that I've always thought the Church was very good at were things called almshouses, which were basically houses that would be built on church estates for the needy. Not only did they want to spend £100 million on this fund, that they wanted to spend £1 billion on reparations as well. Well, why not spend 100 million or £1 billion on a new generation of almshouses, as opposed to just helping one group of people, black British people? Why not just help all people in need?
Alex?
Well, I just don't understand what the Church of England is trying to do. It's on its deathbed.
Congregations have reduced. I mean, deathbed is maybe a little...
Look, if we look over 20 years, it's dramatically lower than it used to be. And a lot of criticism from actual Christians come from the values that the Church of England are now propagating. And Justin Welby has a lot to answer for, because, you know, not only are we seeing in the news there's mass conversion of illegal immigrants to a gay mass system in the UK, but now we're seeing them spending money and And as Albie actually pointed out correctly, in a way that doesn't really benefit broader society, it benefits a very small group of people. So I just don't know where it's going to end. This committee has also said 1 million's not enough. It's 100 million, sorry.
Church commissioners are now hoping for a target of 1 billion.
I mean, it's woke nonsense, isn't it?
You could make the argument that this is charity. Austin Welby's job is to be a virtue signaller, is it not?
Charity discriminate? I mean, that's what he's saying. We're only going to give this to people from a specific skin colour or background. I don't think that's very Christian of them.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've been receiving lots of your views. What should we start with, Tom?
Why don't we talk about sewage? We all love sewage, but Steve says that the Conservatives voted to allow raw sewage to be pumped into our rivers for the next 15 years. Steve, that's not how Parliament works.
Gosh.
Steve, you are so wrong here. If someone puts forward an unfunded amendment that the government votes down, that doesn't mean that the government has voted to allow raw sewage. That means that someone's taken a cost-effective look at something and decided not to bankrupt the country with... there was an amendment put forward by actually one of the Duke of Wellington's descendants in the House of Lords that I think the Treasury calculated would cost hundreds of billions of pounds. Now, voting against such an amendment doesn't mean that you don't want raw sewage in rivers. It means that you need to do some sums before you vote for anything under the sun.
But it was very much presented by most media outlets as what Steve says there. And William says, you were spot on when you said that the problem was population management in regard to sewage overflow. Too many people equals too much poo. And this will only exacerbate itself until we get a grip with migration. Yes, there is an issue that we haven't kept up with demand, clearly, whether it comes to reservoirs and our infrastructure.
Pipes and infrastructure. But Phil says it's not just about the number of people. By the look of most people these days, says Phil, they're eating huge amounts of food.
Oh, come on.
It has to go somewhere. So maybe we're eating too much food as well.
So you're going to blame people who are greedy for our sewage woes?
I mean, the logic works.
OK, so everyone has to go on a diet because we're all excreting too much.
The answer here is we obviously need to build more infrastructure, more sewage infrastructure, more water infrastructure, but that takes time and it costs money and it can't all be done in one go, no matter what any amendment in the House of Lords.
Well, there you go. I can just imagine the NHS's next campaign. Eat less to save our rivers. There we go. Eat less to save our rivers. Right, shall we move on? Because the former maths teacher, Kevin Lister, is claiming unfair dismissal after he was fired because he refused to use a trans student's preferred pronouns whilst he was teaching at New College, Swindon.
Yes, Kevin Lister taught maths for 18 years before he was dismissed for gross misconduct while facing the Employment Tribunal. That's ongoing. He said, it's not the role of a maths teacher to confirm the gender transition of a student.
Well, let's get the views of Robin Moira White, a barrister and a trans woman herself. Robin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Do you accept what the teacher there says? It's not his role as a maths teacher to confirm the gender transition of a student. Essentially, he's done nothing wrong.
No, I think I do believe he's got the wrong focus, because looking after children, there's a UN principle, the best interests of the child. And that needs to be the guiding principle, not the particular beliefs of the teacher.
And so what are the particulars here? What is the teacher being accused of specifically? How did he treat this student?
Well, the student had elected to present in a different gender from their birth gender. They had gone through a process with the school to declare that. And whilst I'm not entirely familiar with particular facts of the case, I understand that there was some form of maths competition in the schools, and that's why the maths teacher was involved. And instead of showing the pupil by the name that they'd asked to be known as, the teacher put up the name that they'd previously used.
Is it not a protective belief, though, and for teachers? I mean, this is what the government is wrangling with at the moment, trying to get guidance for teachers right and balanced and fair. But if a teacher fundamentally believes that you can't change your gender, your sex, then must they go along with it just for the sake of the child?
But we're there to look after the children. I mean, the best interests of the child is the guiding factor.
But what if they believe? But what if they believe, Robin, that social transition is against the best interests of the child, or they are just not allowed to have an opinion on that?
But of course, they can have an opinion, but we don't. School policy isn't determined by the opinions of a particular teacher. They might believe the opposite, and so what we have to have is a policy that accommodates the child properly. In many service provision circumstances, so there's a case called Macaret that related to dealing with people who are claiming benefits, and the benefits assessor didn't believe that people should be treated according to the gender in which they identify. Well, that was found to be unlawful because they were not respecting effectively the clients of DWP.
Well, Robin Moira-White, thank you very much for your views on this topic. As we say, the tribunal is ongoing and we'll be following the outcome of this one particularly closely. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, we will indeed, because it sets a bit of a precedent, doesn't it? Or it could set a bit of a precedent, which way it comes down, in favour of the teacher and his right to not use a child's personal pronouns, or the other way, the school's right to sack him for not.
Yes, rights versus rights. Well, that's it for us today. Up next is Martin Daubney. Martin, what's on your show?
Yeah, great show as ever, guys. Abdul Azidi, it's time for a full investigation, a systemic failure, a Muslim funeral given for the so-called Christian convert who smuggled his way into Britain, a multiple sex offender, too dangerous to even be left alone in church. How did this happen? Heads must roll. The Batley Grammar School have issued a letter saying they are very disappointed, not with the fact they abandoned one of their teachers for 3 years who's still in hiding, but with the findings of the Dame Sarah Khan report. We've got an exclusive from that letter leaked to GB News. The NHS were in a toxic relationship. Well, let's divorce it. And finally, Labour's rejoin fail. Their EU fail. They want to cosy up to Brussels. Brussels isn't even interested. All that's on my show 3 till 6. But first, here's your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Bob Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weather remains very lively. Heavy downpours across much of the UK today. It's still pretty gusty and blustery as well. And here's the reason why. Low pressure continues to dominate. These weather fronts spiralling bands of rain across the UK. It's been particularly wet in Northern Ireland. Weather warning in place here until 3 this afternoon. A line of rain working its way into eastern England. Ahead of that, we have seen some sunshine, some sunny spells following, but also a whole host of blustery showers blown in by a gusty wind, and the wet weather across Scotland, falling as rain at low levels, but some snow over the higher routes possible here.
cold feeling day in northern Scotland, 6 or 7 elsewhere. Well, just about double digits, but still feeling chilly for the end of March. More heavy showers will spread northwards overnight, and this zone of wet weather will be, again, mostly rain at low levels, but could provide some snow, particularly across parts of the West Midlands, up towards North Wales, down towards Gloucestershire for tomorrow morning. It's going to turn windy again through tomorrow as well, particularly from the southwest as further rain comes in here. It'll be a chilly night in Scotland, touch of frost here, but northern Scotland should see some sunny spells during Thursday. Another band of rain then swings up from the south and very blustery conditions along the south coast. There's a Met Office yellow warning in place for those gusty winds. And again, from mid-morning onwards, it's another day of heavy showers. And again, feeling on the chilly side, 10 to 12 at best.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of Weather.